I grabbed a beer from the old refrigerator in the small house I shared with Max Wilson. We were both paramedics, though Max was still working. Today had been my last day on the job. I'd been laid off, the last one hired, the first one fired. So here I was, sitting at home alone on a Saturday night, trying to figure out my next move and feeling sorry for myself. The captain had apologized for letting me go, but with budget cuts, the county just couldn't afford to keep me. Not that I made much. New paramedics here make about $25,000 a year. My experience didn't count for much. I had more trauma experience than anyone in the county, probably the state, except for Max. 2.5 years in Afghanistan as a corpsman with the Marines and Navy had exposed me to every kind of trauma. I treated Marines, Navy personnel, NATO forces, civilians, enemy soldiers, and kids caught in the crossfire of mines or roadside bombs. The kids were the hardest. Seeing those injuries does something to your mind. The images never really go away. I probably would have stayed in Afghanistan if I hadn't been in the wrong place at the wrong time. They gave me a medal for covering a wounded Marine with my body when mortars hit. I also got a Purple Heart and spent 6 months in Bethesda Naval Hospital recovering from a busted leg and shrapnel wounds. Without my body armor, I wouldn't have made it. Maybe it was for the best. I'd been on an extended second tour with a special designation that allowed me to join special operations units. Every day, I pushed my luck further. I volunteered for the toughest missions, working alongside Force Recon and SEAL teams. I was skinny, 6 feet tall, and often looked like a walking skeleton, but I was trusted, and I trusted them to keep me alive. Since being discharged, I'd put on some weight, mostly muscle from weight training at the fire station. I ran a lot, needing to prove my leg was as good as new, though it wasn't. Still, the doctors had done a remarkable job, and now my small VA pension helped keep me afloat until I found another job. During the war, I hadn't had time for much else. The only R&R I took was a brief stint in Darwin, Australia, when my skipper sent me away for a break. It wasn't much, but after a couple of days, I met a girl. The rest of my time there was spent with her. When I returned, the skipper said I looked worse than when I left, but he'd never seen me smile before. He was probably right. Most of the guys I served with thought I was crazy, though that wasn't saying much considering the company I kept. I was the one they wanted with them on missions that could go sideways fast. I kept to myself, and the war had a way of making you a little more off-kilter. I'd had my heart broken before joining up, and in a way, that was a blessing. It meant I wasn't distracted by letters or thoughts of home like the new guys. Most of them would eventually get a Dear John letter, delivered by email these days. Maybe I was lucky to have my heart broken before I left. The result was a heart that was practically bulletproof. I got my Dear John email in college. I didn't sign up for the Navy in a fit of pique. No, I'd had several months to stew about it and finish my associate degree in emergency medical services at Oklahoma State University before I joined for 5 years. After my basic training and hospital corpsman school at Great Lakes Naval Training Center, I was assigned to the Field Medical Training Battalion at Camp Pendleton, California, where I was taught to be a Marine. Holy shit. The Marines believe every Marine is a rifleman to include their Navy brethren who provide the medical services. For 7 weeks, the Marine instructors kicked our butts. I discovered the Marine emblem of Eagle Globe and anchor really meant, get on the ball, shirt bird, or I'll jam this anchor up your butt. My first tour of Afghanistan was with an infantry battalion, and I found out that all that training time was well spent. Was it Medal of Honor Marine Chesty Puller who said, the more you sweat in peace, the less you bleed in war? Very true. I found I loved what I was doing and became an adrenaline junkie. Working accident scenes and other disasters while I was learning to be a paramedic was nothing compared to the rush of doing your job under fire. Plus, it was with a bunch of young guys like me armed to the teeth, fighting boredom and the Taliban, in perhaps equal measures. Oh yeah, I was armed too. Every Marine is a rifleman. None of that Geneva Convention crap. The bad guys killed you just as dead whether you were a corpsman or not, and you definitely didn't want to let those scumsuckers capture you. I carried in 45 Hong Kong dollars and a Kalashnikov AKMS. Both had a lot of stopping power, unlike the wimpy 9mm Berettas and the 5.56 rifles. I always carried a few grenades for good measure, and there were times when I was damned glad I did. The hand grenade, a weapon for all seasons and situations. So there I was at home on a Saturday night, unemployed and without Sophia. I sat in the overstuffed armchair with the faded blue upholstery and took a long pull on my beer and stared at the fire in the small brick fireplace. It was fall and the nights were getting cool. I was breaking my own rule. I could have no more than 1 beer a day. This was my second, and I usually savored each one. But what the hell, I wasn't going anywhere tonight, and I was sleeping alone. My first beer was at dinner with the emergency services crew. the guys from the fire station, and a handful of local and state cops and a few of the staff from the hospital ER. All good people who I had worked with day after day. It was my send-off dinner, although I really had no firm plans to go anywhere. I was going to miss working with them something fierce. After the dinner, Betty Taylor, one of the ER nurses, made it very clear that I didn't have to spend tonight alone. She was tall and dark-haired and beautiful and the subject of a lot of fantasies around the firehouse. She flirted with me every time I was in her ER, and we had dated briefly just after I got back. We had been friends with benefits for a time. Tonight, I wasn't really tempted. I had all the woman I wanted now, or should I say again, and I really was a one-woman man, although I sometimes wondered if Sophia was a one-man woman. She swore that years ago she had made a horrible mistake and that all 18-year-olds make mistakes and are stupid about love. I guess. As I sat there watching the fire, I thought about the phone call I'd just received. It was from Elliot Davies, a Marine officer I'd served with in Afghanistan. He'd been the recon unit commander I'd been with when I got hit, and we'd stayed in touch. He was the last face I saw before the medevac took off after they dragged my sorry but back to the fire base. He'd wished me luck and said to look him up when I got back, and that I wasn't too bad for a squid. Elliot was a reservist and a fire captain in Carlsbad, California, and when I emailed I'd been laid off, he was quick to phone me. He had an opening for a paramedic, at least a 90-day temporary position, while they recruited for the vacant position. If I took the temp job, I'd have an inside track for the permanent position, and it paid a hell of a lot more than the job that had just been yanked out from under me. The thought of living in a small, sun-drenched town on the coast of Southern California also appealed. Plus, he needed me yesterday. I had been to Carlsbad a number of times during my 2 assignments at Camp Pendleton since it was only a few miles south of the main gate. It was just far enough away to not be a service town like Oceanside. It had a fantastic wide beach overlooked by lots of million-dollar homes. A section of Interstate 5 cut through the eastern side of town and was Elliot's responsibility. It was a busy place with lots of demands on emergency crews. But of course there were complications. Complications, such as leaving the town where I grew up. Even though I'd been gone for over almost 5 years, I still reconnected with the town and its culture very quickly. Funny though, had I not been wounded, I might never have come back, but as John Lennon said, life is what happens while you're busy making other plans. My parents and friends all lived in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, population about 14,000. It's in eastern Oklahoma in what's called the Lakes Country, lots of green hills and trees, in the heart of Cherokee County. My dad taught history at Northeastern State University, and my mother taught over at the high school. My younger sister Emily came home after nurses training and got a job at the hospital. And then there was Sophia. After I was discharged and finally home from the hospital, Sophia had reestablished herself as my best friend and my love after our 5 years of being apart. A lot had happened in our lives since the breakup, and we had grown up a lot. It hadn't been easy for me, and I sure as hell hadn't made it easy for her. But she persisted, and over the past year, we'd reestablished our relationship. Just a few days ago, I'd gotten myself together and finally bought her an engagement ring. I planned to give it to her and ask her to marry me when she got back from a teachers' conference in Tulsa. Hopefully that would be tomorrow, Sunday. Well, that is if she was still speaking to me. She hadn't bothered to call when she got there Friday, and she'd ignored my call Friday night. We'd had a fight, the first serious one since we became exclusive last Christmas. Sophia taught first grade for the last couple of years since she graduated from the University of Texas. Now she was getting some kind of new teacher award at the conference at a dinner, and she'd invited me to go along. It was all very last minute, and I was already scheduled to work, and the farewell dinner was set too. She had agreed to be my date for my dinner, and then this award thing and conference came up. So we were both miffed. She left Friday morning. I tried to talk to her that morning as she was leaving. I drove over to her parents' house and caught her as she was putting her bag in the trunk of her Toyota. I just don't understand what's so important about this farewell dinner anyway. They laid you off and you really don't have to work one last day. I'm sure Max would be happy to take your place tomorrow. She was getting herself wound up again. We'd already had this discussion and neither of us was going to budge. Sophia, I've worked with these folks for the last year and this has been laid on for a month. It's the only time when everyone could get together. Remember? And you did say you'd go with me? She didn't want to hear that. Ryan, getting this award means a lot to me. I'm new to teaching and I've worked my butt off being the best. And they're going to honor my work. Why can't you do something for me for a change? You know, like work me into your schedule? Oh shit. I thought. She's bringing up the big guns. We always worked around my shifts at the fire department and I was always on call. I thought she'd gotten used to it, and I really had no idea how much she resented the kind of 24/7 job I had. I thought if you loved someone you'd be happy in what they did. I was certainly happy to be in love with the most beautiful elementary school teacher in the world. Of course, she didn't have my crazy hours. I'm sorry I can't miss this dinner and Max is out of town anyway. She looked at me, fire in her green eyes. I'll bet Betty Taylor will be there, and I know she'll be happy to be your date. She spat. Where the hell did that come from? I thought. This just keeps getting worse. Sophia, that's nonsense and you know it. Then she said that word all men hate to hear from their woman. Fine. She gave me a perfunctory kiss on the lips as I stood in the driveway outside her parents' house. The wind had come up and suddenly I felt a chill. She got in her car and I could see the tears. She didn't look at me as she drove away. I could see her brushing the tears from her cheeks. What a friggin' crappy way to start the day. Fortunately, it did get better, and the few emergencies we handled were minor ones. Betty was indeed at the dinner, and we chatted a lot. She was as engaging as she was pretty. But I chatted with all the women. No big deal. Unfortunately, in a small town, the gossip mill runs around the clock, and by the time it gets back to my sister Emily, or Sophia, rumor would have us screwing on a table in the restaurant. Things broke up about 8:30 because everyone had work. Such was the nature of police, fire, and emergency folks. Emily didn't like Betty either since she saw her as a threat to Sophia. She did have to grudgingly admit that Betty was a damned fine nurse and usually a pretty nice person, but since she was perceived as in the hunt for her brother at Sophia's expense, she was the enemy. Maybe that was true, but in the past Sophia had done her best to destroy any feelings I had for her. Of course, everyone in town knew that, including Betty. So maybe by keeping her hand in, or tits in as I'd like to think, she could just bide her time until Sophia did something stupid again. I certainly had fond memories of our time together, but I now saw my future with Sophia. I looked at the clock on the mantel. It was almost 9 and Sophia hadn't tried to call all day. It was our habit to at least check in when we arrived someplace, but no word from her. I had called earlier in the day from the fire station and left another message. No response. I thought about calling again, but hell, it wasn't my fault. But for some reason it was my fault. Women. Maybe I should just forget the whole marriage thing and just head for Carlsbad. Wouldn't Sophia be surprised? That thought amused me for a few seconds before I rejected it, but it also dredged up old memories and opened some very old wounds. I met Sophia in the late summer, maybe a dozen years ago. I was 14 and had just returned from my Uncle Joe's ranch near Texhoma in the Oklahoma Panhandle. I spent every summer there since I was 12. The work was very hard, but I loved being on horseback and working alongside the hands who were in my mind real cowboys. My only disappointment was that they didn't have 6 shooters on their hips and there were no more Indians to fight. I did learn to shoot and ride and to hunt from my uncle and my cousins and the other hands on the ranch. The shooting became a life-saving skill later on. So as we drove up the gravel drive on that end of summer day in my dad's truck, a beat-up F-150, Sophia was standing on the porch with Emily. They were both 13 and Sophia's family had moved in next door over the summer. Her parents had given up ranching up near Claremore and her dad had moved the family to Tahlequah so he could run the local Chevy dealership. Over the summer, she had become best friends with Emily. I don't know if I would call it love at first sight, but I was certainly smitten with this tall, auburn-haired girl with green eyes. She confessed that she had felt the same way when she saw me get out of my dad's truck and pull my saddle and duffel from the bed. I had grown a couple of inches over the summer and was almost as tall as my dad and now much taller than my sister, who had also put on a growth spurt over the last few months. Emily and Sophia came walking up as I came out of our big barn after stowing everything in the tack room. We lived on the outskirts of town on 1+ acre lots. Each house was set well back from the county road, and most had a long gravel driveway that led to the ranch-style house. Usually there was some kind of barn or large shed in the back. The people who owned our house before my parents had kept horses and had built a barn. We just used it to store things. We had moved in when I was 8, and that barn was the place for my imagination to run wild. It was the place for my cowboy fantasies to find root, and it was also my getaway place. On warm summer evenings, I'd go into the loft and listen to the rain on the roof. It was also where I first kissed Sophia. Emily ran up and threw her arms around me and hugged me. "Welcome home, Ryan." I hugged her back, not failing to notice that over the summer my sister had started turning into a woman. She looked me up and down. "I swear, Ryan, you've grown a couple of inches. Guess they must have fed you okay." I nodded, watching Sophia out of the corner of my eye. "Yeah, Aunt Liz is a fantastic cook." Emily looked at me and said with a smile, "Don't let Mom hear you say that." We laughed, remembering how the sisters always tried to outdo each other. She kept her arm around my waist as she introduced us. "Sophia, meet Ryan, my big brother." I took my battered cowboy hat off and said, "Hi, Sophia." I didn't seem to be able to say anything more. She was dressed in light blue tank top and jeans and boots, and she watched me with those hypnotic green eyes and smiled. My heart melted. So we became the Three Musketeers. Sophia was at our house as much as we were at her house. A couple of years later, Max Wilson became my best friend. He was new in town, and we just hit it off. His family owned the pharmacy. Sophia and Emily grudgingly accepted him because he was my friend, plus my parents loved him. He came from a large family, and his parents were always busy, so I guess he found the love and acceptance at my house. Emily told me later that at first they were jealous of the time he took away from the three of us. I thought he was a great friend, and he was. Max was one of those tall, good-looking guys who had a self-deprecating sense of humor and an uninhibited laugh. The girls at school found him irresistible, but he didn't take advantage. He dated, but it was never serious until we were seniors. That year he was elected class president, and he met the love of his life, Terry. So through all this growing up, Sophia and I became a couple. I don't ever recall anything being said. We just were. The first time we had sex was one afternoon during my senior year. Somehow we found ourselves alone in my house, and it seemed the most natural thing in the world. I was astonished to find out that Max had come through a few months earlier with birth control pills for Sophia. She had it all planned out. Making love to Sophia was the most wonderful thing I'd ever experienced. My last year of high school, I got an internship with the Tahlequah Fire Department, so the summer after graduation, I didn't go to Uncle Joe's ranch. It seemed only natural that Max and I would end up at the firehouse together. We worked with the emergency medical techs and paramedics. I knew it was what I wanted to do, and Max decided he'd also found his calling. We were both accepted at Oklahoma State in their paramedic program at Oklahoma City. Sophia hated to see me go, and much of the summer she seemed insecure. Sometimes she'd just cling to me and cry. I couldn't figure it out. I was only going to be 170 miles away, and I certainly wasn't interested in finding someone to replace her. I expressed my puzzlement to Emily sometime during the summer. "You don't get it, do you?" I shook my head. "She's petrified she'll lose you to one of those university hotties." I was dumbfounded. "Emily, she knows I love her, and I'd never hurt her. I want to spend my life with her. I've told her that over and over. Ryan, we all know too many couples who have broken up when one went off to school. You know, most times absence doesn't make the hair grow fonder." I knew she was right, but I just couldn't imagine a future without Sophia. We had been friends for a long time before we were more than that. I also knew life was uncertain, but even as an 18-year-old, I knew she was the one. I was a one-woman man, and she was that woman. Plus the fact that Sophia had grown into a beauty. I was the one who should have been insecure leaving her, but somehow I wasn't. So I spent a lot of time reassuring Sophia of my love, and of course showing her my schedule for the next 2 years, which was packed with very difficult courses. Being a paramedic was not for the faint of heart, or for those who were not dedicated to the profession. And then for the first time, my life was turned upside down. About a week before Max and I were to leave for college, Terry was killed. She and her mother were coming home one night from her aunt's house when they were T-boned by a drunk. Terry was on the passenger side and took the brunt of the hit. She died immediately. Max and I had both at the firehouse when the call came in. He wasn't working but was just hanging out until Terry got there. They had a date that night. We were in the first aid car at the scene. The cars were so smashed that we didn't recognize it as belonging to Terry's mom until we pulled her out. She was only semi-conscious and kept calling out for Terry. Max and I and the rest of the team worked furiously to get Terry out, but it was obvious that she was gone. Max held her hand in the back of the aid car all the way to the hospital. He knew it was hopeless, but he was a professional and held it together until he's made sure Terry's mom would be okay and Terry's dad and sisters showed up. I took him to my house and woke my parents. I would never forget his look of loss as he sat at our big wooden kitchen table with his hands around a coffee mug as he sobbed. My mother had her arms around him. The whole town mourned. Terry and her family were well-liked in the community. It was probably a good thing the drunk was killed at the scene, or lynching might have come back to Cherokee County. That was the night I vowed that I would never have more than one drink or beer in a day, and I would never drive impaired. A week later, Max was gone. He joined the Navy for 5 years so he could get corpsman training. All of this seemed to make Sophia even more insecure. "I just don't know how I could live without you, Ryan," she said one evening as we sat in her front porch swing. "Max is devastated. I don't know how he made it through the funeral, and now he's gone off to the Navy." She held me tight. "How could that happen, Ryan? They were so happy together." I was pulled from my thoughts by my ringing cell phone. Maybe it was Sophia. "No caller ID," said Max. "Max, what's up?" "Ryan, I need a big favor." I could barely hear him over the country music in the background. "Whatever you need, Max. I'm going to get good and drunk tonight, and I need you to come get me, 'cause I'm going to be in no condition to drive." It already sounded like he was well on his way. But I knew Max, like me, would never get in a car after drinking. Max was supposed to be spending the weekend in Tulsa with his girl, Jessica. What the hell happened? Okay, just tell me where you are. There was a pause. Max? Yeah, man. I'm at Mike's Roadhouse. You know where it is, right? I did know. It was most of the way to Tulsa, just off Highway 64, north of Broken Arrow, maybe 65 or 70 miles away. Well, hell, I didn't have anything else to do at 9:30 on a Saturday night. Might as well go pick up Max. He was my best friend and I owed him. See you in about an hour and a half. Want to tell me what the drunk is about? Another pause. I waited. She dumped me. Okay, Max. I'll be there soon. Max? Yeah? Are you at the bar? Yeah. I want you to give your keys to the bartender and then tell him I want to talk to him. Okay. Max? Hold on, Ryan. Kinda busy here. Had to get his attention. About 30 seconds later, a voice said, Hello? Are you the bartender? One of them. Did you get the keys for my friend? Yup. Thanks. I'm on my way to get him. I'll be there in about 90 minutes. Okay. Got you covered, man. As long as you're here before closing. What's he drinking? Jack? Doubles. Think you could slow them down a bit? Expect so. Thanks. I hung up and grabbed my coat and keys and went in my truck. I figured Max was too smart to drive impaired, but that's why it's called impaired, so I figured it was the smart thing to do to have the bartender keep his keys. It had started to rain. It was a cold late fall rain and the wind was whipping it around. Several minutes later, I turned onto Highway 51 toward Tulsa. Shit. I thought. Jess dumped him. But this breakup was par for the course. Ever since Max lost Terry, he just couldn't maintain a relationship. Iraq and Afghanistan hadn't made it any better. He, like me, had become an adrenaline junkie, and he also had been a special reconnaissance corpsman. Max had recognized where he was going and got out after putting in his 5 years, but he had stayed in the reserves and now served with a Marine unit in Tulsa. The reason Max missed my farewell dinner was because he had a one-day make-up drill with his reserve unit. He told me at every monthly drill they asked for volunteers to go over there. He also told me he was sorely tempted. They always needed experienced corpsmen. I thought it was mainly Jessica that kept him around. And now that I wasn't going to be working with him any longer, well, I'd cross that bridge when I got to it. I also knew if Max went back this time, I might never see him again. Sometimes it sounded tempting to me too. If I didn't have Sophia, might I ask the Navy for a waiver to go back in? If they weren't interested, then I knew some civilian contractors who might need a good paramedic. Probably pay better too. These thoughts raced through my mind as I drove, although in the back of my mind was the nagging thought that I'd not heard from Sophia since I saw her off Friday morning. I drove through the darkness, north and west toward Tulsa. A steady cold rain slowed my progress. Fortunately, there was little traffic, and it was still a little early for the serious drunks to be out, although you could never tell. I felt bad for Max. I'd been there. He told me he thought that Jessica was someone special, and maybe, just maybe they had a future. Obviously, she had hurt him deeply since this was the first breakup that caused Max to get drunk. Most of the time, he just shrugged it off and said, Life's a bitch and then you die. Max is a handsome, engaging guy who women like to be around, but he seemed incapable of giving himself completely. Terry's death and 5 years as a corpsman and then a couple more as a paramedic had changed him. He continued to be the nicest person you'd want to meet. He was always the first to help out, whether it was painting homes for the elderly, collecting toys for tots with the Marines, or just quick with an anonymous handout to a family in need. The community loved him, and he loved helping others. Yes, women liked to be around Max, but when they found out they couldn't really have Max, they drifted away. Max had been out of the Navy for a little over 2 years, and this was his third breakup. No, not breakup, because it always came down to the woman dumping him. There was a strange loneliness to Max. Maybe that's why we got along so well. We've been friends for a long time. We shared the experience of war and civilian trauma and being torn from the women we loved. We were good together as roommates. Neither of us was big into parties, and we tended to like solitary sports like running and rock climbing. Max was also a licensed glider pilot. He said he took solace in the quiet and solitude of soaring. When I got back from Afghanistan by way of Bethesda Naval Hospital, he made sure I had a job waiting at the fire station. I had made it clear I might not stick around, but he just shrugged and said with humor, Give it a try. This place kind of grows on you. We spent a lot of time together, and he helped me readjust, and it seemed only natural that after a couple of months with my mother fussing over me that I decided to move into the little house that we now shared. It was only a mile from my parents' home, so my mother didn't feel cut off. She accepted my need to be on my own again, although I knew she would have been happy to have me under her roof indefinitely. Max refused to let me dwell on the war, or the sometimes unfairness of life and love. Anyway, our lives were pretty much consumed by our jobs and family, at least my family. I knew Max spent some time with his parents and siblings, but the important holidays were at my parents' home. They loved him, and Emily doted on him. Her work as a surgical nurse certainly helped her understand many aspects of his life and mine. Maybe that was what was wrong between me and Sophia. We didn't have enough common ground. Maybe. Although lots of relationships seem to work fine in spite of differences in occupation and world experience. Of course, the fact I was almost a mirror image of Max in experience and attitude didn't help either. And the fact we'd been devastated in love early on made us gun-shy. We always held back. Was that what I was doing with Sophia? Did she even realize how much she'd hurt me 6 years ago? Maybe not. The pain for Max in this latest breakup brought all those memories flooding back. When I went off to college at Oklahoma State, I was really busy but managed to get home frequently enough. Sophia was a high school senior at the time and had planned to go to the University of Oklahoma in Norman, which was just 20 miles from Oklahoma City where I was going to school. We talked about sharing an apartment somewhere between the two. As to marriage, well, I don't recall we ever discussed it, but it just seemed that we would. But we would wait until I graduated. Both families had the same vision, and we seemed destined to spend our lives together. Our plans changed in the spring before she graduated when Sophia was offered an academic scholarship to the University of Texas in Austin. She called me with her exciting news, but she was also apologetic. "Ryan, I'm so sorry about our plans, but this is a fantastic opportunity, and they have such a wonderful program in early childhood education. Anyway, Austin's not all that far away. Just straight down Interstate 35. Well, actually, it was far away. Austin was 388 miles from Oklahoma City. I was disappointed that we weren't going to be together through college, but I loved Sophia, and unlike her, I had no fear that she would go off to college and find someone new. Sophia, congratulations. I'm so proud of you. I know your parents must be really excited not having to foot the bill for the tuition. There is that." She laughed. Her tone turned serious. "Ryan, you will come see me, won't you? Sophia, you're the love of my life. Of course I'll come see you. Just straight down Interstate 35. Ryan, I hate being apart from you. I know, honey. But before you know it, you'll have me around so much you'll be sick of me. I'll never get sick of being with you, Ryan. I love you. Madly? Madly." So through that summer, we spent lots of time together, although much of my time was taken up working with the fire department. I really missed Max. We'd hardly heard from him. He'd finished his training and was deployed to Iraq with the Marines. We got a card from him a few months later. The message was cheerful, but the photo was telling. Max was leaning against a mud brick wall in full combat gear, minus his helmet, cradling a submachine gun. He told me later it was British. The sunlight was slightly off to the side and he was smiling, but there was something unsettling about his eyes. I'd seen that look at Terry's funeral. My parents commented on how thin he looked but said nothing about that 1,000-yard stare. Would Max ever come back to us? As the beginning of the school year approached, I was relieved that Sophia wasn't clinging to me like the fall before when I went off to school. She was genuinely excited to be going off to Austin and experiencing university life in Texas. Our parting was frantic and filled with great sex. The night before we were to leave, I lay there with her cuddled in my arms, panting from our exertions. "Well, if that's the way you say goodbye, I can't wait for you to say welcome." Sophia was quiet, and I felt hot tears on my chest. "Ryan, you won't forget me all the way down there in Austin." I wanted to joke and tell her how silly she sounded, but I thought better of it. "Sophia, as long as I live, I'll never forget you. It seems we've been together all our lives, and I want to continue for rest of our lives." She hugged me. "I love you so much, Ryan." So off we went to our respective schools. At first we talked every day, and then we talked frequently and emailed each day. Those 388 miles became a problem. With my second-year schedule in the paramedic course and the fact I worked at a fire station, a student trying to get experience meant you took the shifts they gave you, and that meant a lot of weekends. So in October and November, I only got to Austin twice. Sophia lived in a dorm, so we had to rent a hotel room to be together. At the November visit, she told me she wouldn't be home for Thanksgiving. Her reasons were kind of vague, something about her first big exams coming up and a presentation in December. I even volunteered to drive down to spend at least Thanksgiving Day with her. The alarm bells should have been ringing when she declined my offer. She asked me to understand. I said I did, but really didn't. Was I suspicious? No. I loved Sophia, and since I couldn't imagine being involved with anyone else, I couldn't imagine her doing that to me. Love is blind. After Thanksgiving, our communications became less frequent. Sophia was always in the library if I spoke to her roommate Trisha. For some reason, Sophia wasn't answering her cell phone. The few times we did speak, she was always too busy to spend much time on the phone. After a particularly brief conversation in early December, I tried to think of the last time she said she loved me. It was then I started to realize that we were no longer together. With my own exams and all, it wasn't like I could just jump in my truck and go see her, and maybe I didn't want to know. Maybe she was just crazy busy like she said, with her school projects and exams, and at Christmas things would get back on track. I'll never forget the day I got her email, not even a phone call. It was December 20th, and it was cold. She told me later she was too much of a coward to face me or even call me. I had just finished my last exam and had worked a grueling night shift at the fire station, 2 horrific car crashes. I was emotionally and physically exhausted and felt like crap. Nothing like coming down with pneumonia to slow your step a bit. I returned to my apartment intending to sleep for a few hours before heading home for the holidays. There was no voicemail from Sophia, no surprise, but for some reason I decided to check my email. I was looking forward to seeing and talking to her over the holidays and hoping we could get our relationship straightened out. With a strange sense of dread, I opened the email from Sophia, and then the tears came as I read it. Dear Ryan, I don't know how to say this, so I'll just say it. I've fallen in love with someone I've met here in Austin. I'm so sorry, but I didn't set out to fall in love. I thought what we had was love, but I know this is the real thing. His name is Alan, and he's a senior, and his family lives nearby. They're wonderful people who have welcomed me to the family. I'll be spending Christmas with them, but I will be home sometime during the holidays, and I really want to see you, to maybe explain. I'm sorry to hurt you, and please don't hate me. I found a very special man, and I know we have a future together. I hope someday you'll find that special person too. Don't forget, I will always be your friend. Sophia. I was stunned. My worst nightmare had come true. In a fog, I packed my stuff, grabbed my laptop, and fled for home, even though that was the last place I wanted to go. I really wanted to hole up in my apartment and not see anyone, but my parents would certainly track me down. 3 hours later, I staggered into the house and went to bed. I woke 24 hours later in the hospital with my mother sitting by my bed. She looked up from her book and saw me watching her. Nice to see you, Ryan. You had us pretty worried. I only nodded, feeling too feverish for conversation. I'll be right back. She came back with a delightfully pretty dark-haired nurse. Her name tag said, Betty Taylor, RN. She was young. Maybe early 20s, and must have been new since I hadn't seen her before when I made my runs with the paramedics during the summer. They prided themselves in knowing all the nurses, especially the attractive ones. Well, Mr. Turner, I'm glad to see you awake. She popped a thermometer in my mouth. I didn't need a thermometer to tell I was running a temperature. My mother stood over me and ran her fingers through my hair. From the worried look, I knew I must have been pretty sick. Nurse Taylor looked at the thermometer and then made an entry in the chart she carried. Next, she adjusted the fluids that were keeping me hydrated and also noted my blood pressure and pulse numbers from the screen of the monitor next to my bed. What happened? I croaked. She spoke before my mother could. Oh, just a little pneumonia. How long were you ignoring the symptoms? Between work and school, I was just sleep-deprived and getting run down. Maybe getting a bit of a cold? Nurse Taylor shook her head and smiled. She had a nice smile. It sounded pretty lame to me, too. My mother shook her head, too. Fortunately, it was bacterial pneumonia, and the antibiotics pretty much knocked it down in a hurry. The fever broke that afternoon, and the next day I was released. I was so weak I couldn't climb the stairs to my room without help. My parents made up the sofa bed in my dad's home office on the first floor. I slept a lot. The day after I got home, I was feeling somewhat better, at least physically. My mother came in with a bowl of her homemade chicken soup. I was propped up in bed, just surfing the web. I needed something to keep my mind off Sophia. I wasn't very successful. Ryan, I've had no luck getting in touch with Sophia, so I went over to talk to Jim and Shirley, and they said she wasn't going to be home until sometime late on Christmas Day. They were so sad to tell me you two have broken up. You didn't tell us? The tears flowed. I just couldn't help it. I didn't want to cry in front of my mother, but with being sick and all, well, so I just opened the email from Sophia and let my mother read it. When she looked up, she had tears in her eyes too. I'm sorry, Ryan. I'm so sorry. She hugged me for a long time. Sophia has made the biggest mistake of her life. Silly girl. She sat with me while I ate the soup. Finally, she said, so are you going to talk to her? Or should I keep her away if she has the nerve to show up? My protective mother had fire in her eyes. I looked at her. I really don't want to see her again. I'll let Jim and Shirley know. They're not very happy either. Emily came in a little while later. She too had fire in her eyes, and also a great deal of sadness. That bitch. Wait till I see her and tell her what an idiot she is. I can tell you, Ryan, she's no longer my friend. I hate her for what she did to you. And she didn't even have the balls to tell you to your face. Damn. Sophia has lost her mind. That night I moved back to my room, and life sort of got back to normal. I really didn't care to go out and see anyone. I expected half the town knew that Sophia had dumped me by then. I was too ashamed to show my face. I was happy to have the recovery excuse. Plus, in fact, I still felt like shit from all that had happened. My mother did manage to get me out for the Christmas Eve service. Sophia's parents were there, but thank God. No Sophia. This was the first time in years we had been to Christmas services without Sophia sitting beside me. As we were leaving the church, I was approached by several of the fire station and paramedic gang I worked with over the summers. They all said they hoped I was feeling better. I didn't realize I'd been a patient, and the paramedics had worked on me on the way to the hospital. Thanks, guys. Sure wish I was with it enough that night to see if you knew your stuff. They all laughed. The captain put his arm on my shoulder. His look was serious. Ryan, we're all glad you're doing fine. Stop by when you get a chance. Thanks, Captain. I will. And Merry Christmas. I noticed none of them asked about Sophia. News travels fast in a small town. Emily never left my side, and I think she warned off some of the girls I knew. She told me later that night that there were several who were going to offer solace. Emily smirked when she said it. I smiled at my protective sister. Could I at least have their names? Solace sounds pretty good right now. I teased. For that I got a punch on the arm. On Christmas Day, I really felt like I had pretty much recovered physically, but I was still coming to grips with the loss of Sophia. I was far from happy, but at least the feelings of loss and sorrow and even rage had subsided a bit. I even got a couple of calls from girls who were home from college for the holidays. They said they had heard I was in the hospital and wanted to check in to see how I was feeling. Nobody mentioned Sophia, but it was obvious that everyone knew I was back on the market. By the afternoon, I had a couple of dates lined up for the following week. I even got a few invitations to New Year's Eve parties, which I declined. The captain had accepted my offer to volunteer with the aid crews on that night. It might free up some of the staff, plus, I just didn't want to be the only sober guy amidst all those happy drunks. I did see Sophia late on Christmas Day, but she didn't see me. Just after dinner, I went to the barn and climbed into the loft looking for some quiet time. It was cold but clear, and as I sat among the old hay bales and looked out at the night sky through the door to the loft, I thought about my life and where I was going. In 6 months, I'd have my associate degree and be able to work as a paramedic just about anywhere. Of course, I could stay in school and get a bachelor's degree, probably in science, but that meant another 2 years. My dad had a PhD and my mother had a master's, and education was highly prized in my family. Emily was in her first year of college at Oklahoma State at Stillwater and was getting serious about going into nursing. So I should finish my degree, but I was ready to try my wings. I decided that perhaps I would apply for some paramedic jobs and see what happened. If I found a job somewhere that sounded interesting, then I'd go work for a couple of years and then think about going back to school. It didn't even cross my mind I would come back to Tahlequah. I wanted to see someplace other than Oklahoma, and I knew I really needed to get away from a place that every day would remind me of Sophia. As I left the barn, I watched a car come up Sophia's driveway. I stepped back into the shadows along the side of my house, but I had an unobstructed view of the front of her house. Soon a new BMW pulled up under the lights of the circular drive in the front of the house. I watched a tall, thin, sandy-haired man get out the driver's side. His air and dress said money. I could see Sophia in the passenger seat when the inside light came on as he opened the car door. He walked around the back of the car and came around and opened the door for Sophia. She gave him a loving smile as she took his hand as he helped her out of the car. He said something to her, and she laughed and hugged him. She then lifted her face to be kissed. How many times had she done that with me? My stomach churned as they stood next to his car and kissed. He broke the kiss, but I could see her face clearly under the house lights. She certainly seemed happy. I watched as they took gifts from the trunk and disappeared into the house. So that was Alan, the love of her life. Well, she had done well for herself, and it was obvious that she wouldn't be coming back to Tahlequah if she stayed with him. I slowly walked around to the back of the house. Fortunately, all was quiet. It seemed everyone had gone to bed. I hung my coat on the peg in the mudroom and slipped off my boots and walked into the living room to take a last Christmas Day look at the tree and my mother's excess of decorations. The only light was from the Christmas tree and the fire in the fireplace. I loved that room and the time of year. There were lots of happy memories. I was surprised to see Emily sitting on the big, overstuffed sofa in front of the fire. She looked up at me. "Join me for a drink, big brother?" She lifted a brandy snifter. Its bronze liquid caught the firelight. I sat next to her, and she offered her glass. Emily had been beautiful all her life, but she seemed to have become even more so in the last year. I knew she dated, but there was no special man in her life. That night she was still dressed in the gray wool skirt and red sweater she'd worn at dinner, and she tucked her legs under herself as she folded against me. I took the glass and drank. Does Dad know you're into his brandy? I won't tell if you won't. I took another sip, feeling her warmth against me. After a couple of minutes, she said, "Guess we're just the two musketeers now." I nodded as I stared into the fire. "I miss Max," she said. "Me too. I hope he's doing okay." I handed her the glass and she took a sip. Finally, I said, "Sophia's home." "Oh? Yeah." As I was coming in from the barn, I saw her drive up with Mr. Wright. Emily took her head off my shoulder so she could look at me. "Listen, Ryan, Sophia may not realize it, but you're Mr. Wright, and someday soon she's going to realize that. When good old Alan dumps her or she dumps him, she'll wake up and come crawling back. But I won't be here to crawl back to." "Oh." I could see her eyes glisten in the firelight. "You're not coming back home after you graduate?" I shook my head. "I can be a paramedic just about anywhere, so I want to go see a bit of the world before I settle down. But I'll always be one of the musketeers." Emily hugged me tightly. "You know you'll always have a home here. Emily, with a nursing degree, you could get a job about anywhere too." "I know, Ryan, but this is my home. You know, like Dorothy Gale?" "Dorothy Gale?" "You know, there's no place like home." I smiled at her. "Well, wherever I am, you're welcome to visit. And of course, I'll be home for those important times like your wedding and the birth of my nieces and nephews." It was her turn to smile as she brushed tears from her cheeks. "Got to find a husband first? I know he's out there somewhere." She got a faraway look and nodded. "Yes, he is." We sat together until the fire dwindled to nothing. It was nice holding my sister and watching her doze. Finally, I kissed her forehead. "Come on, sleepyhead. Time to wake up and go crawl into our beds." She shook her head. "No, I want to sleep here. This is so nice." I hugged her and then, over her protests, got up and pulled her to her feet. "Brute." I smiled as we headed up to our rooms. The next morning, I felt well enough for a short run. I noticed the BMW was gone. I wondered if Sophia had gone with it. The run kicked my butt, but it was wonderful to be out in the crisp winter air. It was a great way to think about things. Maybe Emily was right. If and when Sophia and Alan split up, and that was a big if, since she looked so happy last night, what would she do? What would I do? If she tried to get back together with me, how would I handle it? That was easy. I mulled over several satisfying scenarios which all ended with Sophia humiliated and feeling some of the pain I felt. I loved her very much, but the pain and loss was too great to allow myself to be hurt by Sophia again. I needed to put her behind me. My life was headed in a different direction now, and I needed to concentrate on that new future, a future without Sophia. That was much easier said than done. When I got back from my run, the kitchen was filled with smells of homemade cinnamon rolls and coffee, comforting smells. Maybe Emily was right. There's no place like home. I never did see Sophia again that Christmas vacation. It was just as well. As far as I know, neither did Emily. I had a couple of dates, but despite my best efforts, my heart wasn't in them. One morning the week between Christmas and New Year, I came back from my run and found a small Christmas foil-wrapped package on our doorstep. The tag said it was for me from Sophia. I carried it up to my room and put it on a shelf, unopened. I was happy to pack up and go back to school right after the New Year. I didn't go home again until I finished my second year in early June. I had my associate's degree and could now be a paramedic. During those months, I had reconnected with Max, and he wrote about his life as a corpsman. In April, I visited the Navy recruiter in Oklahoma City and signed up. I planned it so my enlistment began right after school got out, so I spent just 3 days at home before leaving for training at Great Lakes Naval Training Center, just north of Chicago. During the last hectic day before my departure, Emily, who was also home from school for the summer, said that she'd spotted Sophia over at her house, although she had made no attempt at contact. I was glad. As far as I was concerned, we had nothing to say to each other. So with tearful farewells from Emily and my parents, I embarked on my life as a sailor, corpsman Marine. Navy boot camp and corpsman training weren't all that difficult. I was in good shape and a couple of years older than many of the recruits, and I was already skilled in everything they were teaching us about field medicine. Of course, the Marine training at Camp Pendleton was something else altogether. 7 weeks of Marine Corps immersion got me to the point where I was ready to go to Afghanistan, and I was proud to be with these men and women who put themselves in harm's way for their country. I was at Camp Pendleton some months later when I got the first letter from Sophia. We had just dragged in from a 3-day field training exercise when I picked up my mail. There was a letter with an Austin return address on it. It had been forwarded from Great Lakes, where it must have just missed me. I thought about just tossing it, but curiosity got the better of me. Dear Ryan, this letter is very hard to write since I now know what a fool I was to break up with you. I am so sorry for how I treated you. I have discovered, too late it seems, that you are all the man I ever wanted. You were my friend and my love, and I threw that away. I hope that someday you can forgive me. I do love you and always have. Sophia. I crumpled the paper and went to throw it in the trash when for some reason I stopped. I read it once again. I felt sadness. Sadness for what we had and sadness for the future we could have had. My life had changed so much in the year since she tossed me aside that it was like getting a message from a person I hardly knew. My frame of reference for my entire life had changed so drastically that our relationship seemed very far away and now of little consequence compared to what I was getting ready to do. I tore the letter in little pieces and walked away. Driving up that rainy and windswept highway 6 years later, I had to admit that during my first tour of Afghanistan, Sophia would intrude on my thoughts more often than I wanted. After that initial letter, I got a letter from her every month. I was lonely, so I read them. There were no more apologies or protestations of undying love. They were just filled with news about Sophia at school in Austin and about her parents and things that were happening at home. She ended each one with "I love you, Sophia." Of course, I never answered. I was happy for her, and she seemed happy enough, and school seemed to be going well. She loved the idea that someday she would be responsible for a classroom full of children, but there was no more connection between us. My love for her had been burned away by her betrayal. When I returned to Camp Pendleton from my first tour of Afghanistan, her letters finally stopped. I figured she had found someone new. I was surprised that I felt hurt again, although it wasn't near what I felt the first time. Why did she have this effect on me? I redoubled my efforts to be the best corpsman in the Marines and to get my fleet designation so I could deploy with the Recon Marines and SEALs. I didn't hear from Sophia again. I was successful in getting my SARC designation, and back to Afghanistan I went. I thrived in the special operations world. Looking back on it, I sometimes missed it. Not the war, but the camaraderie, the sense of unity and common purpose, and the spirit, and truth be told, maybe the war too. Working at the fire station was somewhat similar, but certainly the constant intensity wasn't there. I thought about my recovery at Bethesda Hospital, and for some reason that jogged a memory about the time a Navy psychiatric nurse came in one day to sign me up for post-traumatic stress disorder evaluation. I was lying in bed with my leg elevated and covered with plaster and pretty painful, and I told her I wasn't interested. Politely, of course. Listen, Marine, you don't have a choice. The SOP says all wounded Marines returning from Afghanistan or Iraq will be evaluated and, if deemed necessary, placed in our treatment program. But I don't have PTSD. Ma'am. Yes, you do. And denying it doesn't help. In fact, no Marine gets released from here without a complete PTSD workup and probably enrollment in a treatment program. So if you refuse to cooperate, I can't keep you around here until doomsday. She fumed. I saw Nurse Nancy Jenkins from physical therapy walk in and stop at the door to my room. She had obviously seen this play out before. Ma'am, could I see that SOP? I put on my best Oklahoma country boy accent. With a look of triumph, she pulled it off her clipboard. Everyone has to sign the form anyway, saying they've read it. I quickly scanned the few pages. Well, ma'am, this here don't seem to apply to me. What? Ma'am, guess I should be insulted, being mistaken for a Marine and all, but I'm a sailor and I don't see anything about sailors in your SOP. Nurse Jenkins stifled her laugh with her hand. I thought the psych nurse was going to have a fit. She stormed out. Nurse Jenkins admonished me for baiting Nurse Williams, but added that stupid bitch had it coming. For a few days at least, I was a minor hero around the place, especially among the Marines who were being evaluated. I never did see Nurse Williams again. I guess she didn't try to get that SOP changed to include sailors. I smiled. Other than that experience, my stay at Bethesda was exceptional. I enjoyed the dedicated professionals and how they took care of us. Having my leg damn near shredded, I could have done without, but on the whole, I was treated very well. Early on, my parents visited for 2 weeks. I was embarrassed to have them see me so incapacitated. For the first week, they were there. I couldn't even get out in a wheelchair because of the recent surgery. The second week was better, and they were able to get me out of the ward. I felt pretty good by the time they flew out. They also felt better seeing my improvement and knowing I was going to be coming home to Tahlequah upon my release. I hadn't made that decision lightly, but I really needed a place I could kind of hole up and get my bearings. Sea legs, if you will. Emily came out twice during the summer and stayed for a week each time. My stock among my fellow patients went up considerably when word got around I had a drop-dead gorgeous female visiting me, even if she was my sister. And I swear each day when she came in, her skirt got shorter and her tank top a bit tighter. She was definitely good for morale. The first time I was still confined to a wheelchair, but by her second trip I was up and about and the cast was off and I was in intense physical therapy. I could walk with a cane and was getting stronger each day. I was one of the lucky ones. Emily and I didn't try any line dancing, but we did spend some time touring DC. She was also pleased I was coming home, but she realized that I still didn't feel about it like she did, and I probably wouldn't stay. On one of those days, we were sitting on a bench near the Lincoln Memorial, just off the Capitol Mall, enjoying the late summer weather. Emily wore a bright yellow sundress and looked beautiful as usual. She pulled a card from her big straw bag and handed it to me. "What's this?" "It's from Sophia." "Oh." I just looked at it. "Aren't you going to open it?" The familiar ache in my chest was back. I had pushed all thoughts of her away for some time, but here she was again. I wanted to simply hand it back to Emily, but she had brought this card all this way, so I felt like I needed to at least see what Sophia had to say. I pulled it out of its sunny yellow envelope and saw a handmade card on parchment paper with an excellent miniature watercolor painting of flowers on the cover. On the inside, in Sophia's neat handwriting in bright blue ink, it said, "Dear Ryan, I know you may not want to hear from me, but I just had to let you know how happy I am to hear you are recovering so well. I was so worried when I heard you were wounded. I hope you will come see me when you get home. I miss my best friend. Love, Sophia." I tried to hand it to Emily to read. "Ryan, I know what it says. I was with her when she wrote it. She made the card too." I couldn't think of anything to say. Finally, Emily said, "Well, what are you going to do about Sophia?" I just looked at her. "Ryan, she loves you. She made a mistake a long time ago when she got involved with that snake Alan. She'd give anything to take that all back. But now she's back home and teaching school, and she's a different person." I didn't answer and just stared at the puffy summer clouds. Finally, I said, "I don't know. So the Navy finally released me from the hospital and discharged me from the military." I was saddened by that. I figured I could still do a damn fine job for the Marines and Navy, but in retrospect, it probably was for the best. The rain turned to sleet as I drove through the darkness. Thoughts of a job in sunny Southern California became more appealing as I was forced to slow as visibility became worse. The wipers worked overtime. What the heck was going on with Sophia? This was the first time since we'd gotten back together that we'd spent any time away without a call. Maybe I should go to Carlsbad and have us spend a little time apart. That most certainly would get her attention. Is that what I wanted? I thought I had her attention. So why had she gone off in a snit and then refused to communicate? I admit I had the upper hand in our relationship since I returned to Tahlequah, but that was her choosing. Despite her hand-delivered by Emily card, I made no attempt to contact her when I got home. I knew she was living at her parents' home while she was starting out as a teacher and that she was right next door. But those few yards between the houses seemed more like a minefield I didn't want to pick my way across. I could see no reason to reopen the relationship that had ended badly and had caused me so much hurt. I'd been home from the hospital a little over 3 weeks when I finally saw Sophia. It was 8 in the morning, and I was at the counter at Big Tony's Cafe and Espresso getting a coffee. She was dressed in skirt and sweater and flats, what she called her teacher uniform. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a scrunchie, and as always she was beautiful. Actually more beautiful than the last time I saw her. She walked up to me smiling uncertainly. "Hi, Ryan. Welcome back. How are you?" She didn't notice that Tony had handed me 2 coffees. "Thanks, Sophia. Doing well." Before I could say anything else, Betty Taylor walked up and took one of the cups. She was in her green scrubs, but still looking delectable, and she casually slipped one arm through mine. That universal sign to other women that this man is taken. She told me later that as she waited for me in her car, she had seen Sophia come in and wanted no mistake about who was with whom these days. Sophia stood wide-eyed for a couple of seconds, likely noticing that I was unshaven and my clothes were a bit rumpled. I thought I carried the look of someone who had been through a lot, but in a way that suited me. Her eyes seemed to get bigger as she realized what that meant and why I was with Betty before work having coffee. "Hi, Sophia," she purred. Sophia responded with a nod, and red-faced she turned and fled. We walked out and Betty said, "Wonder what got into her." I laughed. It wasn't because of Sophia's discomfort, but just the strangeness of life. Betty gave me a smoldering kiss as she dropped me at my house before she headed for the hospital. She was working days then, as I was, while I was going through mandatory training at the fire station. She had grabbed me the first day I showed up patient in tow in her emergency room. I was the butt of a lot of good-natured humor around the fire station for having landed the unobtainable Nurse Betty. Somehow I think we both knew it wouldn't last, but my time with Betty was unforgettable. She was beautiful, funny, and an imaginative bed partner. We were exclusive for a few months, and I'm sure the talk of the community. Neither of us tried to hide our relationship, and I certainly heard about it from Emily, who at that time was firmly back in Sophia's corner. One morning before work, Emily and I were standing in the kitchen finishing our coffee. We were alone in the house. She was in her scrubs and I was wearing my white shirt and dark trousers paramedic uniform. "Geez, Ryan, can't you see it? Betty's not the one for you. She goes through boyfriends like tissues." She'll toss you into the trash pile with all the other guys in this town who thought they were the one. Emily, not that my love life is any business of yours. I said it with a smile. But we're two consenting adults who happen to have a great time together. And I also know she's only had 2 relationships in her life, despite what the rumor mill at the hospital says. In the first one, she had her heart broken, and she broke up with the second. She's very cautious around men, and for good reason. From the look on her face, I could see Emily disagreed with my assessment of Nurse Betty Taylor, and she tried a new tack. Wouldn't hurt for you to at least go and see Sophia. To what purpose? Like Betty, I'm very cautious around the opposite sex, and you know why. Ryan, that was a long time ago. You need to go see her and maybe just tell her how you feel and that she needs to get on with her life since there's no chance you're going to get back together. Emily, Sophia's not stupid. I think by now she gets the picture. For the last 4 years, I've ignored her attempts to contact me. It's been 5 years since she broke up with me, and despite her letters and her protestations of love for me and no other, I've not encouraged her in any way. She's seen me around with Betty and knows we're dating. Can you tell me why on God's green earth she would need an explanation? Emily replied quietly, because she still loves you. Good grief, Emily. How can she possibly love me? She doesn't even know me. I'm not the same gullible kid who believed her lies about our love lasting forever and the rest of that crap that sounds like some insipid Valentine card. Talk about tossing someone aside like a tissue. Emily looked shocked at my outburst and on the verge of tears. Sorry. I took her hand. Didn't mean it to all come out that way. She put her arms around my neck. I'm sorry, Ryan. I sometimes forget how badly she hurt you. And you know me, the eternal optimist. You and Sophia are my best friends, and I just want everyone to be happy. I hugged her. Changing the subject, I said, Emily, how about you? When are you going to find that special man anyway? I caught a brief glimpse of sorrow as she tried to smile. Oh, just as soon as he realizes I'm the one. I was surprised. You mean there is someone special? Emily nodded. Anyone I know? Someone at the hospital? Not that ER doc. What's his name? Carter? Who seems so self-important? She just shook her head. So are you going to tell this clueless person how you feel? Can't. I don't know how he feels and I don't want to rock the boat. I looked at my beautiful self-confident sister. I was puzzled. But love seems to make us all insecure and vulnerable, and I was far from being in a position to give advice. I'm sure he'll come around, but if you need me to give him a push, just let me know. This elicited a smile and a hug. A few days later, Sophia surprised me. I was out at the end of our driveway near the county road stretching, getting ready for my early morning run when she appeared. She was dressed like me in sweatshirt and running shorts despite the chilly morning. Good morning, she said cheerily. Dressed as she was with her beautiful legs on display, I couldn't help staring. She had matured into a true beauty. I looked at her and said nothing, and she seemed to flush under my gaze. Mind some company? I shook my head and started off down the road. I was a solitary runner, always had been. I avoided group runs and never cared for the macho chatter. Running allowed me to let my brain freewheel, and many times to solve the thorniest problems. I figured if she wanted to run with me, well, it's a free country, mostly, so she could come along as long as she didn't expect me to talk to her, and as long as she could keep up. So we ran silently through the early morning chill, watching the light change as the sun come up behind us over the colorful hills of fall, our breath streaming behind us. Sophia was obviously an experienced runner, having no problem with the 4 miles I led us on that morning. When we were about a half mile from our starting point, I slowed us to a walk to cool down. We didn't say a word until we reached the entrance to her driveway, when she said, "Thanks, Ryan. See you tomorrow." And so it went for the next couple of weeks. I had to hand it to Sophia. She was out every day, rain or shine. Most mornings I would mumble a reply to her good morning and set off. It was near the end of probably the 3rd week when she asked me a question at the end of a particularly fast-paced 5 miles. Were you going to tell me you were moving? We had stopped at her driveway. I watched her beautiful face with its mix of emotions, her auburn hair ruffling in the breeze. She stood close to me and I could smell her, a mix of sweat and the spicy scent she wore. I nodded. Yes, I think so. She nodded and said, I'm glad. So that was the start of the next phase of our relationship. Sophia seemed to time it perfectly since Betty had started on nights, and we would be seeing a lot less of each other. So I moved in with Max. We were a good match. And soon the 4 musketeers seemed to have reformed. Emily took over as social director, and Sophia was always with her. One evening after we'd been to the lake, just to walk and admire the late fall colors, we decided to go out for pizza, but inexplicably both Max and Emily begged off. I didn't think much of it at the time, but looking back on it, it was an obvious setup. That became what we thought of as our first unofficial date. During that time when the Musketeers were formed, I realized how much I had missed the four of us together, and it began to dawn on me that I missed Sophia. About a week or so after our date, we were sitting bundled up against the fall chill on the front porch, swing at her parents' house, just watching the stars, when Sophia said, "Ryan, I promised myself that if you and I ever had a chance to get back together, I'd only apologize once. If you accept, I'd never mention it again, and the Ryan Turner I know would leave it at that, and never throw it back at me." I said nothing. "So Ryan, I'm just going to say this once. I'm sorry for how I treated you. There was no excuse for my actions in Austin. I was stupid and fell victim to a real smooth operator. I'm not using that as an excuse. I knew what love was, and that was what we had. I pushed that away and hurt you terribly. I didn't even have the nerve to tell you in person. I promise if you'll have me again, I'll never do anything to hurt you. I love you, Ryan, and I always will." I tried to stifle a wince because I'd heard those words before from Sophia. She frowned because I had not hit it well enough. Unlike in those chick flicks, I didn't gather her in my arms and tell her everything was okay, and we would get back together. I'd only been home from the war and hospital for a few months and was just getting used to civilian life and being around Sophia again. Plus, to tell the truth, I had developed some strong feelings for Betty, although I didn't think those feelings were reciprocated. "Sophia, I accept your apology, but I have to tell you that you are the one person who makes me vulnerable. And you hurt me so deeply, even though it was a lot of years ago, that I need time to think about what you just said. I'm a different person now, and so are you. I need to take things slow and think about all you've said and being around you." "Okay." She readily agreed, and we started dating, but we didn't take up where we left off. There was no passionate love-making, not that I didn't want it, but I held back. Sophia was more than willing. She also tried to accept the fact I was still seeing Betty. So our relationship bumped along for a month or so. Betty, the smart one, caught on to what was happening fairly quickly, and after a night of spectacular lovemaking, she tenderly sent me on my way to figure out what was going to happen with Sophia. I was relieved and saddened. Betty had become my friend too, and we truthfully vowed to remain so. I did hear through the grapevine that Betty was hell on wheels at the ER for a few weeks after our relationship ended, but never to me, and she continued to spurn the advances of the other paramedics and firemen. I took grief at the fire station for that too, although by then it was common knowledge that Sophia and I were back together. The night we finally got back together, Sophia and I went for a walk by the lake. It was the beginning of December and a perfect fall evening with a crescent moon just starting its climb into the night sky. I told her I was willing for us to be exclusive again and to give things a try. She cried and hugged me. A couple of days before Christmas, we were on the big sofa in front of the fire at the little house I shared with Max. The only light was from the fireplace, and I had my arm around Sophia, and for once, everything seemed right with the world and my life. Our parents were thrilled, as was Emily. Max was another story. He hardly said anything, seemingly just accepting the fact we were all together again. Of course, that's what best friends are for. As we sat, I reached down along the side of the sofa and pulled out the foil-wrapped package from that day, 5 Christmas ago, and put it on my lap. It took a few seconds for Sophia to realize what it was. "You never opened it?" "No, those were kind of difficult times in my life, and even packages from Santa sometimes got put away for another day. A happier day. Is that what today is? A happier day?" She said it with a catch in her voice. I nodded. She hugged me, and I could see her tears in the fading light. I tore at the paper. Inside was a very expensive Littmann stethoscope. I'd never owned a nice one before. I could only afford the cheap ones, or they'd been issued to me by the fire department or the Navy. "Sophia, I don't know what to say, thank you." She was quiet for a time. "It's engraved too. It has your initials on it. I wanted something special for you. Something I knew you'd use every day." Her voice trailed off, and she put her head on my chest, her tears wetting the front of my shirt. Once she quieted, I moved her back from me and slowly unbuttoned her blouse. She just watched me in the dim light as I put the earpieces in and moved the chest piece to the bare skin where I could hear her heart. I smiled at her as I removed the stethoscope. "Sounds fine. Maybe a little fast, but certainly normal." Eyes still glistening, Sophia grabbed me around the neck and kissed me. I tasted the salt of her tears. For the first time in over 5 years, we made love that night. It was wonderful, better than I remembered, and a reaffirmation of our love and my forgiveness. And for the first time in over 5 years, I told Sophia I loved her. She never apologized again, and we did everything we could to put it all behind us. I thought successfully, except I always held back a part of myself. I hoped after a while I could just let go and love her like I had loved her before. I suspected that Sophia knew I didn't love her the same way as before, but she never stopped trying and showing me in large and small ways that I was her man, and she loved me without reservation. Perhaps this was what her little tantrum was about. She wanted to teach me a lesson. She wanted me to miss her and worry about her. Maybe make me jealous. I didn't know, but it wasn't working. I thought we were adults and beyond all that nonsense. I was just angry. As I drove into the parking lot of Mike's Roadhouse, I was still trying to sort all this out. The rain had let up. It was more of a steady cold drizzle now, but the wind was still pretty fierce. The parking lot was jammed and I found a place toward the back to park my truck. I grabbed my barn coat and pulled it around me and held onto my hat as I dodged puddles as I made my way to the entrance. When I walked in, I was greeted by recorded country music, but relative calm. It appeared the band was on break. I made my way across the now empty wooden dance floor to the crowded bar. I'd been to Mike's before and was always impressed by its size. I was also impressed by how the bouncers kept things under control. Mike's wasn't what you'd call family-friendly, but it was a place you could go for a beer and some dancing without getting into too much trouble. And the waitresses and bartenders were always on the lookout for drunks and would refuse to serve them. So what can I get you? The bartender put a Lone Star coaster in front of me. He was a large, muscular guy, maybe in his 50s, or a little older, with a fading Marine Corps tattoo on his big forearm. His name tag said, Dan. I'm here to pick up some car keys and a friend. He nodded his head in the direction of a booth in the back corner across the big room. He's over there. Beth's keeping an eye on him, he said as he pushed Max's keys across the polished bar toward me. Thanks. Much appreciated. I laid a 20 on the bar. He looked at it and then me. That guy in the corner. He said you were both corpsmen in Afghanistan and served your time with the Marines. That true? That's right. We never served together, but we were both there. He's still in the reserves. We're both paramedics now in Tahlequah. They couldn't convince you to join the reserves too? He chuckled. He must have caught the frown that momentarily crossed my face. Couldn't. Oh, sorry. No, I'm lucky. Lots of guys not so lucky. I'm still walking around. It was the big man's turn to frown. Yeah, I know. Had my 19th birthday in Vietnam. 7th Marines. He pushed the 20 back across the bar next to Max's keys. Go get your friend. Semper Fi. Semper Fi, Dan. I walked to the back of the cavernous roadhouse toward the booth where I could see Max, his head resting on his arms on the tabletop. He had a half-full glass of clear liquid in front of him. There was a pretty young waitress working the tables and booths nearby. She was wearing a short denim skirt, boots, and matching sleeveless shirt. I came up to her and saw the name tag on her shirt said, Beth. How's he doing? I nodded toward Max. Been like that for the last half hour or so. I stopped bringing him drinks about an hour ago. He didn't need anything more. That's 7-Up in the glass. You here to take him home? Yup. Woman trouble? I smiled at her. Bet you've heard all the stories. Maybe not all, but most. She laughed. Beth had a nice laugh. She pulled a card from the pocket of her skirt. Do me a favor and give that to him. He's kinda cute and well, let him know he can give me a call. Her reluctance made it clear she didn't give out her card freely. I nodded and handed her the 20. What's this for? Look, I know you probably lost some tips on drinks by letting Max monopolize this booth. Plus that's thanks for keeping an eye on him. She looked at the money. I figured she needed it. Maybe for school. I touched her hand. Keep it. With thanks. She pushed the bill into the front pocket of her skirt, smiled and walked away. I slid into the booth across from Max, my back to the room. I touched Max's arm. Max, time to go home. No response. I reached across and shook his shoulder and said Max a little louder. He slowly raised his head and looked at me with bleary eyes. Ryan? That's me. Your chariot has arrived. Just then I heard a laugh that turned my blood to ice water. It was Sophia's laugh. No, not really her laugh, but the laugh she does when she's had too much to drink. I look over my shoulder and spotted her not far away coming from the direction of the ladies' room. She was with her college roommate, better known to me as that bitch Trisha. Sophia was wearing a very short denim skirt, cowboy boots, and a white tank top. What the hell were they doing here? I watched Sophia as she put something into her purse and noticed a white strap. I assumed it was part of her undergarments. I also noticed Trisha was dressed similarly. I was a bit confused by this. They moved across the dance floor and joined a table with two attractive young men, probably in their early 20s. Sophia sat next to one of them, and I saw her laughing as he said something to her. She then kissed him. It was clear from the way they kissed that it was more than just friendly. I observed her reaction as he touched her in an intimate way, and his friend was doing something similar with Trisha. I turned back to look at Max, who had been watching the same thing. Hey, Ryan. Isn't that Sophia? He slurred. No. You sure? Yes. He looked at me strangely and put his head down again. I pulled out my cell phone and hit her speed dial number. She obviously heard it since she broke the clinch with the cowboy. She pulled the phone from her bag and looked at the caller ID. She frowned but made no attempt to answer. I didn't leave a message. My heart raced as I watched her, and I got more furious by the second. The band chose that moment to reappear and start up. The two couples joined the throng on the dance floor. I was fighting mad and ready to rip that guy and Sophia a new one. I looked across at Max. Obviously, he couldn't back me up. Then my heart turned to stone again. What the hell did I expect? Sophia screwed me over once before, and here she was doing the same thing almost exactly 6 years later. Sure, we weren't engaged or anything, but she had said she loved me and would never hurt me again. Maybe she only meant she wouldn't hurt me if I was around. Otherwise, all bets and promises were off. Well, screw her. I wouldn't play her game. Even if I went over there and punched the cowboy out, he wasn't any bigger than I was, and I was pretty sure I was meaner, but win, lose, or draw, the result was the same. Sophia and I were through. Why take a chance on getting busted up or going to jail for a woman who couldn't or wouldn't stay faithful? I could never trust her again, so screw it, let her have her cowboy. I kept my back to the dance floor and my hat pulled down as I pulled Max to his feet. Fortunately, he was still ambulatory. As we skirted the dance floor, I lost sight of Sophia and her friend. Just as well. I supported Max across the muddy parking lot and stood over him as he lost his dinner and a lot of booze next to the back tire of my truck. I was relieved he hadn't waited until we were down the highway. I got Max buckled in and got into the cab behind the wheel. At that moment, I saw Sophia and her friend walking across the parking lot. He had his jean jacket around her shoulders, and they had their arms around each other, moving quickly through the cold drizzle. Sophia showed evidence of having plenty to drink, but it was obvious from her activities inside, and now in the parking lot, she did know what she was doing. I felt sick. I watched him help her into the cab of his big Dodge pickup, including running his hand up under her skirt, which only elicited a laugh from Sophia as she playfully slapped his hand away. I drove off without a backward glance. The cold rain picked up again, maybe heavier than before. It matched my mood. I picked a Gary Allan CD and listened to his voice most of the way home. In the cab of my truck, the wipers straining to keep up with the torrents, the wind trying to push me off the road, and Max slumped against the passenger door. I planned my departure for my new life and job in California. I knew I should never have come home to Tahlequah. The sound of a hairdryer cut through her fitful sleep like a buzz saw. Sophia moaned as she came awake to a killer hangover. Her head ached and her body resisted even the slightest attempt at motion. She was vaguely aware she was still wearing the same clothes she had on last night. What had possessed her to drink so much? Last night? Oh my God. Had she really let her former college roommate Trisha talk her into going out to Mike's Roadhouse after the awards banquet? Oh. And suddenly her memory came into muddy focus as she recalled how she and Trisha had picked up those two cowboys and she had let one of them, was it Kirk, take her out to his truck and then? Oh God, had she let him? She was lying on her back, reaching down to check for any signs of what had happened. Sophia sighed with relief when she didn't feel anything unusual. Then, she remembered what had occurred earlier and felt a wave of disgust as she ran her hands up her body, feeling the remnants of it on her shirt. The nausea almost overwhelmed her. What was wrong with her? She had Ryan again and had promised to be faithful. Before her thoughts could travel down that path any further, there was blessed silence as the hairdryer cut off. A few moments later, she heard Trisha call her. Sophia, you awake yet? Checkout is at noon and it's 11:15. Best get going, girl. Unless you're going home looking like that. Trisha chuckled. Suddenly, Sophia was furious. It was like old times with Trisha, the woman who could never stay in a relationship, leading her around and into trouble. Trisha had introduced her to Alan and had constantly harped on Sophia for being faithful to Ryan that first few months of college in Austin. She encouraged Sophia to get out and meet some new people. Sophia knew that Trisha was only partially to blame since Sophia jumped into the social scene at the University of Texas thinking that her relationship with Ryan was rock solid, and it wouldn't hurt if she went out once in a while, and of course Ryan would never find out. What a fool she was. Alan saw her as an easy target, and with his wealthy sophistication and his smoothness, at 18 Sophia hardly stood a chance of resisting. He was a senior, and he swore he loved her. That set the stage for the easy seduction, but somehow deep inside she knew Alan didn't love her like Ryan did. Once Alan had her, he did all the romantic things like bring her little gifts and taking her out to the nicest restaurants. His parents were also charming, living in that big home outside Austin and having another home in Dallas. So Sophia convinced herself she was in love with Alan, and even though it was different than with Ryan, it was new and exciting. For years, every time she thought of it, she kicked herself for being so gullible and for her shameful treatment of Ryan. She betrayed him, and then she didn't even have the nerve to tell him in person that she had found someone else. She had hurt the only man she had ever really loved, but by the time she discovered how stupid she was. He was gone. She thought probably never to return. And here she was again letting herself be led away from Ryan by Trisha. No, she thought ruefully, the fault was entirely hers. But why? Before she could go further with that train of thought, Trisha came into the room wearing a towel, another wrapped around her hair. Bathroom's free. You'd better get going. I've called down for some coffee. I think we both need some. Sophia forced a smile, although she felt like hell and also felt like lashing out at Trisha. She groaned as she sat up and put her feet on the floor. You certainly seemed to have a good time last night, Sophia, and Kirk really seemed like a nice guy. I'm sure he'd like to see you again. Sophia said nothing as she fled to the bathroom and closed the door. She wept as the hot water poured over her. How could she have been so stupid? She vowed that she would do everything she could to make it up to Ryan even though he didn't know about it, and that she would never do anything like that again. What she had re-established with Ryan was too valuable to lose. What was the problem? As she toweled her hair, she couldn't face the sound of the dryer. She looked at herself in the mirror. She could hardly meet her own eyes for the shame of it. She had only come to her senses last night in the big truck when Kirk had told her he wanted to screw her. Why had she gone to his truck anyway? What did she think was going to happen out in the parking lot? She considered herself lucky that he was the kind of man who would settle for a BJ. Had he been more forceful, she might have let him have her just to be done with it. And then what? She had no worries about pregnancy but unprotected sex? What was she thinking? How had it come to this? She just shook her head. She threw her clothes into a suitcase and they said their goodbyes. She was grateful that Trisha had to leave for an appointment in Austin, so they could not prolong their parting. Sophia promised herself she would never see Trisha again. Of course, she had vowed the same thing after Alan had dumped her, but when she showed up at the teachers' conference, it was like they were college roommates all over again. What a fool I am, she thought as she got in her car for the drive home. She pulled out her phone. It was dead, and she'd forgotten to pack the charger. Her stomach lurched as she thought about the call she'd received from Ryan last night. She'd seen it was him on caller ID but had ignored the call because she was with another man. Why had she been so stupid? Why hadn't that phone call been a wake-up call for her? At that point, she should have called it a night. Looking at her phone reminded her she'd ignored his calls all weekend and hadn't tried to contact him. Why was she mad at Ryan anyway? She thought about that as she drove the highway. The rain had cleared, and even with her sunglasses on, the brightness of the late fall day bothered her eyes. They had been back together since Christmas last year, and that was what she wanted. She had tried very hard to win Ryan back, and she knew the competition was formidable, especially from Betty Taylor. She flushed with embarrassment as she thought about that first day she saw him after he got home from the hospital near Washington, D.C. She had so hoped he would come see her when he returned, but he had made no attempt at contact. She had even enlisted Emily to help out, but it had been futile. So the day she saw him in Big Tony's, her heart jumped. He was so handsome, and the years was absent had added maturity to his rugged good looks. She felt the love for him warming her soul, and at the same time felt the regret of loss, knowing it was her fault. She had approached him, and warmed by his smile, she tried to find the nerve to ask him to meet for coffee. Just then Betty Taylor had walked up and with a gleam in her eye and put her arm through his. Sophia was humiliated as she realized they had spent the night together. Completely flustered, she had fled. But she had been determined and started running with Ryan in the mornings. That first morning she had been up for hours in a state of nervous excitement as she watched for him to walk up the drive toward the county road to start his run. What if he told her he didn't want her company? She was satisfied when he just allowed her to run with him, and so it went. Fortunately, Emily kept up her support too. Eventually she got what she wanted. But had she? Sophia reflected. Did she really want Ryan, or was it a challenge to win him back and away from Betty? She pushed those thoughts away. Of course she loved Ryan, and she wanted to be with him, and she had for many years except for her stupidity with Alan. So what was the problem? The little voice in her head that had been around for a few months answered, "But does Ryan love you?" She knew he did. He said it and showed it in so many ways, and he was fantastic in bed. So why the doubts? She knew the answer. Ryan was holding back. Was it because he didn't love her enough, or was it that he was afraid of being hurt again? Sophia was indignant as she thought about all the times she had professed her love for him, but that emotion turned to shame as she thought about last night. Was he right? Did he know her better than she knew herself, that she might be incapable of being a one-man woman? That was absurd, she thought. She just slipped up a little after having too much to drink, and it wasn't like she really did anything. Well, a BJ in a truck in a parking lot of a roadhouse actually was doing something, but it wasn't like she and Ryan were engaged or anything. This kind of circular thinking made her headache worse. The biggest immediate problem was how she was going to apologize to Ryan for not speaking to him all weekend. How could she look him in the eye after last night? Her actions were really inexcusable, and had their positions been reversed, Sophia would have been deeply wounded and might have a hard time forgiving him. She sighed, thinking that Ryan will never know, so she should just call him as soon as she got home and say she was sorry for not calling. Sophia pulled into her driveway with some relief because she didn't see Ryan's truck at his parents' house. That would have been hard to ignore. Her determination to call Ryan as soon as she got home waned as she entered the house. It was after 2 in the afternoon, and neither of her parents was home, so she went to her bedroom and unpacked and plugged her phone into its charger. She thought about calling Ryan right then, but was so tired that she thought it might be better if she had a nap first. Her sleep was interrupted by her ringing. She saw it was from Chris Parker. She was relieved it wasn't Ryan. She wanted to call him, but wanted to have her story straight before they talked. "So tell me how he did it?" An excited voice asked. "What? Geez, Sophia, don't drag this out. Did he get down on one knee? Was it at his place? Come on, girl, give." "Chris, I have no idea what you're babbling about," she said somewhat impatiently. There was silence. "Oh shit," was all she heard in response. "What? Never mind. Just forget I called." "Chris, what are you talking about? Who gets down on one knee?" Then it struck her, and her heart skipped a beat. Chris had to be talking about Ryan. Had he told people he was about to propose? "I'm sorry, Sophia. Me and my big mouth. Just forget it, okay?" "Chris, is this about Ryan and me?" "Yes," she said in a quiet voice. "And Ryan was going to propose?" "Yes," she responded, this time even quieter. "And how did you come by this information?" Silence. "Chris? Okay. Well, you know my brother Carl works at Elite Jewelry, and? Well, Ryan came in on Wednesday and bought a half-carat engagement ring, and I just figured by now." "Sorry, Chris. No engagement yet? I've been out of town." She tried to keep the feeling of dread out of her voice. "Sophia, I'm so sorry. I just figured Saturday night would be the night." "Sorry?" Sophia cringed as she mentioned last night. Had she gone to the farewell dinner with Ryan, she'd most likely be engaged now and happily showing off her ring to all her friends. Now she was nauseous with the feeling that she had screwed up royally again. "Well, congratulations early, I guess." "Thanks, Chris," she said and hung up. Sophia sat on her bed and cried as the light outside faded. Finally, she made up her mind. She needed to see Ryan and tell him how sorry she was about the weekend. Of course, leaving out her indiscretion from last night. She took another shower and agonized over what to wear. She decided on jeans and a dark blue sweater that Ryan had given her. The weather was cool but dry, so she slipped on a pair of sexy pumps. She stopped to check messages before she left, and there were several missed calls. The last one from Ryan was from last night when she was at Mike's. There were also 3 from Emily. Emily had only left one message, and that was from 10 this morning. "Sophia, we need to talk. Call me." She couldn't face a call to Emily right then, so she erased the message. Sophia smiled uncertainly as she looked at herself in the mirror. She knew she had to salvage this situation somehow, and tried to come up with a plausible excuse for not contacting Ryan all weekend. She was still mulling that over as she headed down the stairs to the front door. When she opened the door, she met her mother, who was coming in with a bag of groceries. "Oh, there you are, Sophia. Just get home?" "No, I got in a couple of hours ago and took a nap." "Oh, Mom, I've got to run. I'm going over to Ryan's place for a while." Her mother got a strange look on her face. "Hold on a second. I guess Ryan didn't manage to track you down before he left?" "Left? He came by early this morning, said something about going to California for a job. Said he'd been trying to get hold of you over the weekend, but you didn't answer or call back." Sophia tried to hold back the tears. "What's the matter, honey? Did you two have a fight?" Sophia shook her head as the tears came. Her plans for an apology and an engagement suddenly shredded. Why had he left without telling her or waiting for her to get home? He hadn't mentioned anything about a job in California. Was this how he was punishing her for not calling him all weekend? How had things gotten so out of hand in just a couple of days? Suddenly, her blood ran cold. Had he found out about last night? She pushed that thought away. She hadn't seen anyone there from Tahlequah. Her mother saw her distress and took her to the kitchen, where she put the kettle on for some herbal tea. "He left you a note. Asked us to give it to you when you got home." Her mother handed her a plain white envelope with only her name on the outside written in Ryan's block letter handwriting. Her hands shook as she pulled the letter from the envelope. The tears came again as she read, "Dear Sophia, this weekend apart has given us some time to reflect on our relationship. At least it has for me, and I'm sure with the way we parted last Friday, you've given it some thought too. You brought up Betty Taylor, which saddened me. Do you know me so little that you think I could be unfaithful to you? You should know that I am a one-woman man, and I expect the same degree of trust and faithfulness from that woman. I've concluded, and I think you have too, that you are not that woman. I've taken a job in California, and I'm leaving. I will always look fondly on the friendship we've had. I hope you find the man you are seeking where you can be a one-man woman. Ryan. Sophia was stunned. She read the words again and again. What had happened over the weekend? How had what she considered a little tantrum where she cut off contact with Ryan for a couple of days caused him to break up with her? Her thoughts turned again to last night at Mike's Roadhouse. Her stomach lurched. She simply shook her head in disbelief as the tears fell. How had things come to this? Chris's phone call had told her Ryan was on the verge of proposing. What happened? Wordlessly, she handed the note to her mother, who read it with tears in her eyes. Want to talk about this? She shook her head, but said, I left on Friday and I was mad because he wasn't coming along. He had a going-away party with the fire station gang, and he wouldn't change his plans. Her mother said nothing, thinking there must be more. He wouldn't change his plans for me, even after he knew how important the award was. So I left mad and I ignored his calls and didn't call him all weekend. Did you have any idea about this job in California? Sophia shook her head. Must have come up over the weekend, while you weren't taking his calls. Her mother added. Sophia nodded. So now what? Her mother asked. I think I'll go next door and see Jim and Kathy and see what they know. Maybe they can tell me where he's gone. Have you tried to call today? No. Her mother gave her a look that said volumes about what she thought about her daughter's intelligence. Well, call him and apologize even if you only get voicemail. Sophia nodded and got up from the table. Thanks, Mom. She went up to her room and called Ryan. It went direct to voicemail. She wondered if he had his phone off. Ryan, I'm so sorry for everything. Please call me. I love you. She ended the call and sat on the bed, and the tears came again. Was this some kind of test? Did he want to make her grovel? She had worked so hard to win him back and convince him she loved him and she'd never hurt him again. Visions of last night's encounter with the cowboy at the roadhouse and in the cab of his truck raced through her mind. She tried to push them away, but she knew her actions were hardly those of a one-man woman. Even drunk, she should have known better. How could she do that to Ryan and to herself? Sophia's thoughts turned back to her solitary car ride home earlier in the day, and again she surmised that maybe Ryan knew her better than she knew herself. Was she incapable of staying faithful, or just incapable of staying faithful to Ryan? Good God, no. She loved him and always had. Even when she had her insane fling with Alan in college. And that's what she thought of it as she looked back. Somehow, despite the excitement of the attention he heaped upon her and being around all that money, somehow she knew it couldn't last. She was more in love with the excitement of new love and the attention of an older, more sophisticated man than actually in love with Alan. When she had written that horrible email to Ryan, she had been ashamed. Ashamed how she had been so easily seduced by Alan and his sophistication and money. He had seduced her so easily it seemed she hardly had any resistance to him. He was something she had never experienced in Tahlequah. Alan dumped her about a week before he graduated, and she'd gone home to seek out her best friend, to be consoled by the man she really knew loved her and always would. To her anger and dismay, she discovered that he had come home from college a couple of days before she had, and before she could work up the nerve to see him, he disappeared from her life, disappeared for 4 years. She had felt alone and abandoned. That first summer without Ryan had been the most miserable of her life. Even her friend Emily wouldn't speak to her. It took a long time to repair the relationship with Emily and her parents. And to make it worse, Ryan ignored her letters and emails. Not once in the 4 years he was gone did he acknowledge her even once. She got all her news through Emily and Ryan's mother, Kathy. She also remembered the day they were notified that he had been wounded. It was about 1.5 years ago. That morning she was headed off to work, and as she got in her car, she saw a blue-painted car with U.S. Navy on the door drive up the driveway to Ryan's parents' home. She knew that was how people were notified of death or injury, and her heart seemed to stop. Trembling, she ran along the path and through the side gate between the houses and arrived at the door just as the naval officers were being ushered in by an ashen-faced Kathy Turner. Moments later, Kathy, Emily, and Sophia were in tears. Tears of sorrow and relief. Sorrow because he'd been wounded, and relief that he wasn't killed. Ryan's dad, dressed in his usual tie and jacket, ready to leave for the university, had his arms around Kathy and Emily. Unfortunately, the Navy people didn't have much information about the severity of Ryan's wounds, but they just knew the injuries were serious and that he'd been evacuated from Afghanistan. She remembered little about the rest of that day. She somehow got herself together enough to teach her classes, but the sorrow she felt and the thought she might lose Ryan caused her such distress that she couldn't eat and hardly slept. Her anxiety was only relieved a week later when Emily told her that they had spoken to Ryan from a military hospital in Germany. Now the nightmare was beginning again. In a daze, Sophia walked the path to Ryan's parents' home. She walked into the kitchen without knocking, as was her practice. Kathy was taking a chicken from the oven and turned and saw her. A look of concern came over her. Kathy set the roasting pan on the stove and hugged Sophia as Sophia started to cry. Eventually, Kathy led her to the big wooden kitchen table. Kathy poured them both a cup of coffee from the thermos pot she kept on the counter and then sat next to her at the table. Sophia, what's this all about? She just slowly shook her head. Did Ryan say anything to you? Ryan came by early this morning and said he was leaving for California to take a job in a fire station. He said he got a call and job offer last night from a Marine officer he worked with in Afghanistan, who's the fire captain. They need him right away, so he had to go. His truck was packed, and he was going to say goodbye to your folks and then head out. Sophia just stared at her. I asked him about your reaction to the news, and he said he'd not been able to get in touch with you all weekend, that you were in Tulsa getting some kind of teaching award. Did you have a clue about any of this? Sophia shook her head as she stared into her coffee cup. Finally, she said between the tears, Ryan and I had a fight last Friday as I was leaving. I wanted him to go to Tulsa with me for my award, but he said he had to go to his farewell dinner. That hurt my feelings, so I didn't talk to him all weekend. I was upset that he'd put those people ahead of me, so that's all there is to it. Kathy looked skeptical. Sophia nodded. They sat in silence for a few minutes. Sophia, I don't know what happened, but Ryan looked terrible, like he hadn't had much sleep. You sure there's not more to this than a lover's quarrel? She shook her head. You sure neither of you said anything unforgivable on Friday? No, she said sadly. Well, there certainly seems to be some kind of disconnect, and it seems more than a disagreement about going to a conference as opposed to a dinner. Sophia saw Kathy glance toward the kitchen counter next to the refrigerator. When she followed her gaze, she spotted a black velvet-covered ring box. Her stomach lurched, and she had to fight the nausea that threatened to overwhelm her. She was glad she'd not eaten all day. Can I look at it? Kathy seemed surprised. Did you know? Only about an hour ago. A well-meaning friend spilled the beans. Oh, I'm sorry, she said, as Sophia picked the ring box off the counter. She moved back to the table and sat, fearing her legs wouldn't hold her much longer. The ring was beautiful, a round-cut diamond solitaire, maybe a half-carat, a ring she had dreamed about. Alan, of course, had never given her a ring, and now she had lost Ryan again. She closed the box and put her head on her arms and sobbed. Kathy put her arms around her. Let's give it a few days, maybe it'll blow over. Deep in her soul, she knew it would never be the same. Monday morning, Sophia dragged herself from her bed, having slept little. When she finally called Emily, her conversation had been very much the same as with her mother and with Kathy. Sophia expressed bewilderment about Ryan's sudden disappearance. Emily said his early Sunday morning appearance at the hospital caught her by surprise, but that was nothing compared to his news he was leaving for California and that he had not been able to reach Sophia over the weekend. Emily quizzed Sophia closely about the nature of their parting, puzzled by its suddenness. Sophia knew that Emily didn't want to lay blame and that she loved both of them, and she was well aware that Sophia was in large part responsible for Ryan's last sudden departure. Sophia drove to Big Tony's to get her customary latte, which this morning was badly needed. She would have loved to call in sick, but the school was having a recognition lunch for the faculty, and she was being honored. She wondered how she could hold herself together. As she got her coffee, she spotted Max sitting in one of the back booths. He didn't look too good. She hadn't called him, so she thought that she would try to find out what he knew about Ryan. Hi, Max. May I join you? Max looked up from his half-eaten plate of now cold eggs and hash browns. Sure. Bess, a slim redhead and a fixture at Tony's, came over and refilled his coffee mug. All done, Max? She asked. He nodded. Anything for you, Sophia? No thanks, Bess. Max looked at Sophia as Bess cleared the plate away. Bess looked at the uneaten food and said, Everything okay with breakfast this morning, Max? Sam's not used to having plates coming back hardly touched, she said with a smile. Sophia knew just about every woman in town had fantasies about Max. Bess was no exception. Max smiled at her. No, tell Sam not to worry. Just a little under the weather from the weekend. Bess smiled in return. Well, that's a relief, honey. Wouldn't want Sam to think he's losing his touch. I'll keep the coffee coming, though. She laughed as she walked away. Sophia didn't wait for small talk and jumped right in. Heard anything from Ryan? Not a thing. Did he tell you anything before he left? No. I was unconscious. He just left a note saying he had accepted a job in California. Did he give you any clue he was leaving when you last saw him? Max smiled. No, when he picked me up at Mike's on Saturday night, I was too drunk to have much conversation. Sophia felt like a knife had been plunged into her heart. Mike's Roadhouse? Max looked at her for a few moments with a puzzled expression, then something clicked. It was you, he said. Me? She barely squeaked out her response as the tears came. I saw you there, and I asked Ryan, but he said it wasn't you. Sophia's world started to collapse. Ryan saw me? She said, having a hard time getting the words out. Max nodded, looking very sad. In the booth with those two cowboys. I think he even tried to call you. And I think in the parking lot too. On unsteady legs, Sophia fled the cafe, tears streaking her cheeks. On a bright late summer Saturday afternoon, Sophia stood in the back of the choir loft, out of sight of the people in the church below. Actually, she was standing behind the string quartet that was entertaining the arriving guests. The quartet was playing Spring from the Four Seasons by Vivaldi. She could clearly see Ryan and Max, though, standing in the sanctuary. They were dressed in tuxedos and looked relaxed and happy, and they seemed to be sharing a joke as they waited for the ceremony to start. She loved both these handsome men. She could also see the first couple of rows, empty now, reserved for parents and other close relatives. The church was beautifully decorated with flowers at each row and large stands of late summer flowers. Sophia vowed she wasn't going to cry on this happy day. She retreated to the dressing room, which was just off the loft, and was met by a nervously pacing Emily. You were gone a long time. Oh, stop. I was maybe 5 minutes. You know, I just had to make sure the groom and best man hadn't chickened out. Very funny. So are you ready? Emily nodded. You look beautiful. You clean up pretty well yourself. Lots of guys will have their eyes on you today. Okay, girlfriend. Let's knock him dead. Minutes later, Sophia walked down the aisle as the string quartet started another Vivaldi piece. The church was packed with happy, excited people. It looked like half the town turned out. And why shouldn't they? Certainly the skeptics among them never believed a wedding would ever take place. Despite the fact they had loved each other for years, they had managed to overcome separation and distance to finally make happen what the whole town knew was inevitable. Sophia kept reminding herself not to cry. She kept her focus on Ryan and Max and their warm smiles as she approached. Finally, she reached them, and they all turned when the quartet started into Bach's Cantata 147. 3.5 minutes of the most beautiful music ever composed, and the perfect amount of time for Emily to walk down the aisle on her father's arm. Sophia watched them as they appeared in the vestibule, waiting for their cue. About halfway through the piece, Emily and her father stepped into the church proper and onto the carpet, which was strewn with rose petals. She looked so happy, and her wedding dress was nothing like the confectionery creations that made a bride look like a meringue. Instead, it was a long, creamy, sleeveless silk sheath that showed off her toned body. Emily had been in love with Max for probably as long as she'd known him. And Max was a little slow at arriving at the conclusion he loved her, but once he realized it, he didn't waste any time. Neither of them had ever told the other for fear of breaking up their friendship and the Musketeers. When Ryan left last year, somehow it all seemed to come together, and within weeks Emily and Max were engaged. Good thing something wonderful came from all that, Sophia thought ruefully. As Emily approached, Sophia's eyes wandered and were drawn to Lily Bryce, a beautiful, tall, leggy blonde from California. She was actually Dr. Lily Bryce, and her figure was more Gwyneth Paltrow than Jessica Simpson. She was dressed in a simple pale yellow sleeveless dress, probably silk, with a thin alligator belt. It perfectly complemented her tanned arms and legs. The dress was a simple sheath and looked expensive. It most certainly had not come off the rack at Target. She was standing next to Ryan's mother in the front row, befitting her position as Ryan's fiancée. As the music faded, a beaming Emily reached the little group. She looked radiant as she took her place across from Max. Then the four of them turned and faced Pastor James. Beloved, today we celebrate the marriage of Maxer and Emily, who finally discovered what this town knew for a number of years, that they were meant for each other. This elicited the obligatory laugh from the gathered. Even Sophia smiled. Yes, they were meant for each other, and she was so pleased for her two best friends. As the minister started into his little sermon about the sanctity of marriage, Sophia thought about the rehearsal dinner the evening before in the large garden of the Rose B&B. That was when she was first introduced to Lily Bryce. She, of course, had known about Ryan's engagement. Who hadn't? At the dinner, the members of the wedding party and their guests had been seated at white tablecloth-covered tables in the arbor as various family members told loving and funny stories about the bride and groom-to-be, oft-time with hysterical photos. After dinner and many toasts, the party had wound down, and people, as they often do, ended up in 2s and 3s around the garden. Sophia was alone on one of the mahogany benches under an ancient oak when Lily walked up, wine glass in hand. May I join you? Sophia looked up and saw Lily silhouetted against the skyline in the late summer twilight. She had removed her high-heel sandals and held them at her side by the straps. On her left hand, a magnificent engagement ring reflected the light. "Of course. Please have a seat." Lily was dressed elegantly in a burgundy silk blouse and a cream skirt that came to her knees that looked to be linen and silk. A thin corded black belt with a tiny silver buckle encircled her waist. Other than her blonde hair, which was cut fairly short, she looked like she had stepped from the pages of a fashion magazine. Sophia thought her short hair might be because of her profession as a trauma surgeon. Damned heels were killing me. She laughed as she sat. It was a nice laugh. Lily rubbed one foot, then the other. "That's a great idea." Sophia slipped off her pumps and sighed as she felt the cool grass on her feet. Lily looked at her. "Funny how some of the greatest pleasures come from the simplest things." Sophia nodded. "Of course, if we didn't torture ourselves trying to impress our men, we wouldn't have sore feet." They sat in silence for a few moments, enjoying the evening. Finally, Lily spoke. "You're Sophia, aren't you?" Sophia nodded and braced herself for the inevitable questions about why she and Ryan broke up, but she was mistaken. "You've known Ryan for a long time, right?" "Yes, since I was 13. He's a pretty special man, isn't he?" "Yes. Here it comes." She thought, "This is a wonderful town, and I've seen how he's respected here. And my lord, how a lot of women look at him." She laughed. "So maybe you can tell me why no one ever managed to snag Ryan. Not that I'm complaining, mind you." Sophia was stunned by the question. Had Ryan never told Lily about her? Maybe not. Ryan was a private person, and why should he tell Lily about a woman who broke his heart twice? She thought about how to answer. "You're right. Ryan's a special guy, and I think a lot of women had their eyes on him, but with being in the Navy and gone for 4 years well, Ryan has some pretty high standards when it comes to a relationship, and there are some pretty stupid women in this town. Well, what I'm trying to say is Ryan is a one-woman man and demands the same in return." Lily looked at her. "Oh." It was obvious she understood. "Guess that's lucky for me." Sophia could only nod, afraid she'd show her emotions with any other response. She decided to change the subject before Lily could get any more information from her. "So how did you and Ryan meet?" Even in the dwindling light, Sophia could see Lily's smile and the look of happiness in her eyes as she thought about their first encounter. "Sophia, do you believe in love at first sight?" "Yes," she said, trying to keep her voice neutral as she thought about the first time she saw Ryan when she was 13 and he was 14. She'd fallen in love with him that day. Lily looked at her, but continued. "With my job in the trauma center at UC San Diego, I sometimes attend the monthly countywide trauma task force meeting. Actually, most times I try to avoid those meetings like the plague. Must have been fate that I couldn't get anyone to take my place that day." Lily paused. "Anyway, the meeting was a luncheon, and it was hosted by the medical folks at Camp Pendleton at one of the clubs on base. So I came in, and expecting to be bored out of my mind, I took a seat at an empty table at the back of the room. That way, if it was too ghastly, I could duck out. Cell phone to my ear, pretending it was an emergency." She laughed. "I was checking messages on my BlackBerry, when suddenly there he was asking me if the seat next to me was taken. I looked at him, and it was, well, you said you believed in love at first sight, so you must know. I don't remember what I said, but one thing was for sure, I sure wasn't going to let him sit anywhere else." Lily paused again, basking in the memory. "I've never had that reaction to a man before." Her eyes got a faraway look. "Not even with my late husband." Sophia was surprised that Lily had been married before. Everyone knew she was a single mom, but that bit of news had not made the gossip circuit in Tahlequah. So there I was, and well, there was this gorgeous man in his paramedic uniform with his southern boy accent and those dreamy gray eyes of his, and suddenly I couldn't think straight. It was like being in the movie Bambi that my 4-year-old daughter Emma loves so much. There's that scene where the old owl describes what happens in the spring, and he warns Flower, Thumper, and Bambi about becoming twitterpated. Well, that sure was me. Lily laughed again. "Yes, that's the best description. Twitterpated." Sophia politely laughed. She had heard that Lily had a 4-year-old daughter. I have no idea what was on the program that day, or what was discussed. Every time Ryan looked at me, I just wanted to drag him off, so we could be by ourselves. I know I didn't eat much either. And it's so funny, I was jealous already, and I hardly knew him. Jealous? There was this cute little Navy nurse from the hospital at Camp Pendleton who plopped herself on the other side of Ryan in her tight little white uniform. Of course, fate would have it that on the day I'd meet the love of my life, well, I'd thrown on a blouse and skirt with some flats and very little makeup. She laughed. After a moment, Lily went on. And she was really working it. Touching Ryan's hand and forearm all the time and batting her baby blues at him. I really wanted to slap her. But then I watched Ryan. Kind of funny since I didn't know what kind of man he was at the time. and most men I know would have had a hard time resisting that little bitch in the tight uniform, but Ryan did. Lily grinned. I watched his eyes, and every time she made some flirty move his eyes narrowed, and the stupid cow had no idea. I guess her little flirty, "I'm so cute and available" act was totally lost on Ryan. I never wondered if he was gay because when he turned back to me his eyes would open up and I'd get lost all over again. As the meeting ended, Nessie handed him her card, and with what I can only describe as a smoldering look then turned and walked away, swaying her hips on her high heels. Ryan left her card on the table when we left. Smart man. Lily paused, reliving that day, her smile wider than ever. Anyway, I was talking to Ryan about my job at the trauma center, I think, but I can't be sure. And I looked around and the room was practically empty. We both seemed to realize it at the same time, so we got up and side by side headed for the door. I wanted to take his arm and stake out my territory. You know how we do. Telling the world this is our man. Lily laughed again. Sophia nodded, remembering doing that with Ryan herself. She was glad it was getting dark so Lily couldn't see her sadness. As we walked out the main entrance, this great bear of a Marine, a gunnery sergeant, spotted Ryan and grabbed him and hugged him. I was so surprised. And then the Marine said something like, at that point Lily lowered her voice to imitate the Marine. Damn Doc, I was just thinking about you. Wondering what happened to you when they took us off that medevac, and here you are. Guess you must have been all right. Then the gunny turned to me and said, sorry ma'am. Didn't mean to interrupt, but Doc and I go way back. He saved my butt in Afghanistan. The dumb shit? Sorry. Well, he covered me with his body when the mortars came in. Took one that was meant for me. Ryan looked embarrassed, and then the gunny said, so how's the leg, Doc? Ryan assured that his leg was fine, and they exchanged contact information. The gunnery sergeant, who had a chest full of ribbons, told Ryan he owed him big time, and they needed to start with drinks at his home in Oceanside. He said his wife wanted to meet him. It was kind of funny because the gunny turned to me at that point and said, oh, and you're invited too, ma'am. He just assumed we were a couple. Maybe we looked like a couple. And sweetheart Ryan didn't contradict him. It was true too, because from that point on I was Ryan's woman. He might not have known it yet, but that was the case. Unfortunately, we both had to go back to work, so we parted, and I knew he was going to call. When Ryan says something, he means it. Another reason I love him. Sophia cringed. To my delight, he called that night, but with our work schedules, we couldn't get together for a week. I was going crazy. I really was ready to drag him off to bed, and I was calling that nurse a bitch. She giggled. So 2 nights later, Ryan shows up on the medevac, landing on the roof of the trauma center. He had his fingers inside the thigh of a Marine who had been in a horrible car accident and was keeping him from bleeding out by holding onto the artery. That was a Saturday night, and we were swamped, so it was just me and Ryan and one surgical nurse in one of the small operating rooms. We worked on that Marine for several hours and got him stable. I fell more in love with him that night, and I thought I couldn't be more in love with him already. Sophia really didn't want to hear any more, but short of being rude, she had to stay. She had started this conversation after all. So we finally got the Marine stable, and when we got him out of we ended up on the roof of the trauma center. Someone had dragged an old sofa up there, and it was in a sheltered area, so it was a good place to sit and relax, especially after such a grueling night. So in the early hours of the morning, we sat together, and I looked at the stars. The next thing I knew, I was waking up. You know how you can come out of a deep sleep and sometimes feel so safe and warm? Sophia didn't respond. Well, when I woke up and it was just dawn. I don't know if he slept. I sure did. I was exhausted. But anyway, Ryan had his arm around me and his jacket over me, keeping me warm, and he was looking down at me. I'll never forget the look in his eyes. So loving, so caring. Sophia held back her tears as her heart ached. She had seen that look from Ryan and so missed having his arms around her, especially when she awoke. Why had she been so stupid? And then it happened. I don't remember who kissed who first, but suddenly he was kissing me and I was kissing him. I was in heaven. Sophia was overwhelmed with sadness, and it took all her self-control not to bolt for the house. She was glad it was completely dark now. And then we just sat there close together, my head on his chest. He smelled so damn good I never wanted to get up. So we sat and watched the day begin as it got lighter and lighter over the bay. Sophia had heard enough. I'm sorry. I'd love to stay and chat, but I've got to find Emily. You know, last-minute details and all. Lily looked at her in the darkness and said, oh, I am sorry, Sophia. Of course you've got a million things to do before tomorrow, and I've been sitting here monopolizing your time. Please forgive me. Oh, don't worry about it. It's been a pleasure getting a chance to talk to you, Lily, and hearing about how you met Ryan. Sophia tried to keep the sadness out of her voice. I'm so glad he's found happiness. She said this as she escaped into the darkness, tears streaking her cheeks. Suddenly, Sophia was back in the present. "Emily, do you take Max as your lawful wedded husband, to have and to hold?" And the ceremony continued. Emily and Max smiled at each other, and soon Max placed the ring on Emily's hand. And then it was over. Pastor James introduced the couple to the crowd. "I present Mr. and Mrs. Max and Emily Wilson." The string quarter started again, and the couple walked down the aisle arm in arm to enthusiastic applause. They were followed by Ryan and Sophia. Sophia smiled with joy for them, and then she looked at Ryan, but even though she had his arm, he was looking elsewhere. Sophia followed his gaze and met Lily's eyes and saw understanding. What Sophia had been able to conceal in the darkness the night before was revealed to Lily in the light of day. Sophia held back tears as they reached the large vestibule. She sent Emily and Max upstairs while she and Ryan moved outside to organize the crowd for the newlyweds' exit. "Call the limo," she reminded Ryan. He pulled out his phone. As the happy crowd formed on the steps, Sophia made her way back to the dressing room upstairs. "Okay, you two, break it up." She had come in as Max and Emily were engaged in a passionate kiss. Emily laughed. "It's okay. We've got a license." Max just smiled. "Okay, as soon as the limo arrives, Ryan will call me and then down you go. Straight to the limo. No hanging around. The caterer has timed this to the moment, and you wouldn't want lunch to get cold, would you? What if we just skipped the reception and went straight to the honeymoon?" Max joked as he eyed his bride. They were going to Rome the next morning. Emily put her arms around his neck. Anxious to see what's under this dress, she batted her eyes at him. He lifted her off the ground and kissed her passionately. "Yes," he said as he put her back down. They all laughed, and as they enjoyed the moment, Sophia's phone buzzed. "Ryan says the limo's here, so let's go." Max and Emily followed her down the stairs, and she stepped aside as the couple made their way out the church doors and into the bright sunshine to be greeted by applause and a shower of flower petals. Sophia watched the happy scene from the shadows of the vestibule. Max and Emily, looking radiant as they made their way to the white limo. Ryan, Lily by his side, held the door for them as they reached the big car. Max shook Ryan's hand and Emily hugged him. As the limo drove off and the happy crowd dispersed toward their cars, Sophia watched Ryan put his arm around Lily's waist as they walked toward the church parking lot. She walked back into the empty church and then sat in the last row, looking at all the signs of happiness that marked the wedding of Max and Emily. Sophia needed a little time for quiet and reflection. God knew there was so little time for it over the last several months between the trauma of Ryan's departure and the planning for Emily's wedding. She thought about that miserable time right after Ryan left. Her stupidity, again, had caused her to lose her man, the man she had loved half her life. After the meeting with Max on that Monday morning, she had barely made it to school. How she made it through the day and the ceremony honoring her for her award of New Teacher of the Year she didn't know. Somehow she had managed to keep the fake smile glued to her face all day until at last, in the parking lot, she let go and sat in her car until dark, sobbing. That night she went to see Emily to confess. She wanted it to be clear that this breakup had nothing to do with Ryan. This time there were no recriminations from Emily, only a deep sadness at the foolishness of her friend, and sorrow that her brother had been hurt again. Thinking back on Emily's reaction, Sophia wondered if Emily had some doubts about the relationship. She may have detected something in Ryan that showed he was holding back, or she just knew Sophia would do something stupid again. Sophia told her parents a brief and somewhat sanitized version of the events at Mike's Roadhouse and how Ryan came to be there. Sophia was so ashamed that she took some of the money from the teaching award and moved into a cottage nearer the school. For a while she became a hermit. Her life consisted of go for a run, go to work, and then go home. She turned down all dates and never went out. She even tended to do her shopping in the later hours of Saturday or Sunday night. She only spoke to Ryan once, and that was a month after he left when she finally got up the nerve to finally call him. "Ryan, it's Sophia. Please don't hang up." "Sophia, I don't intend to hang up. How are you?" "I've been better." "Me too." "Ryan, I'm sorry. I just needed to tell you. So sorry to have hurt you again. After I promised, there's no excuse for the way I acted." Silence. "Ryan?" "Yes." She wished she could see him and gauge his reaction. She knew not to ask him for another chance. She had gotten another chance a year ago, and she knew there were limits on what she could ask of him. "I would just like you to please forgive me. I'm not asking that we get back together, but just to forgive me." She sobbed. "I'm so stupid, I just wish sometimes I could die. Hurting you was the worst thing I've ever done, and I'll never forget. So please, Ryan, please just say that, somehow, you'll forgive me." "Sophia, I don't wish you ill, and I can only promise that someday I will forgive you. Right now the feelings are still pretty raw." Thank you for calling me. That was a brave thing. I hope that someday you can find happiness. Thank you, Ryan, for talking to me. I wish you lots of success in your new job and new life in California. Thanks, Sophia. Goodbye, Ryan. Goodbye, Sophia. And that was it. The last time she spoke to Ryan before the rehearsal, and she had hardly had a chance to spend 2 minutes with him with all the last-minute things she had to do for the wedding as maid of honor. And of course, gorgeous, sophisticated blonde Lily was with him all the time. Sophia looked at the large cross on the back wall of the church. She had some decisions to make, and she said a quiet prayer for guidance. The past spring, to the dismay of the principal and almost the entire staff, she had decided not to renew her teaching contract for the following year. She had to get out of Tahlequah. She agreed to teach at summer school since she had to help with the wedding through the summer, but right after the wedding she would leave. She had been accepted for a position at 2 private schools a continent apart, one in the Raleigh-Durham area of North Carolina and the other in Marin County, just across the Golden Gate from San Francisco. Both jobs began in January, and they wanted her decision now. Each also paid considerably more than she was getting now. Should she just flip a coin like in that Joe DiMessina song? Heads Carolina, tails California, somewhere greener, somewhere warmer up in the mountains, down by the ocean, where? It doesn't matter as long as we're going somewhere together. I've got a quarter. Heads Carolina, tails California. She smiled as she thought of the lyrics, and then she fished in her purse and found a quarter. Lord, this may be a strange request, but I'll stand by your decision, she whispered. She flipped the coin. Tails. Thank you, Lord. She sighed. At that point it felt like a great weight had been lifted from her, and she smiled. She was being given another chance and a new life, and she promised God in that beautiful church filled with the flowers of joy that she would make the most of it. Sophia whispered one more prayer for Max and Emily's happiness and then left the church humming Heads Carolina, Tails California. Lily Turner stood at the helm of the Lady Nora and watched a flock of brown pelicans as they flew across the bow, low on the water, in single file. They didn't fly in AV. Unlike geese, they weren't migrating, they were scanning the waters searching for fish. The weather was perfect for sailing, a sunny and warm day with a strong following breeze that kept the sails filled as they made their way towards Santa Cruz Island, 20 miles distant. It was just past noon and the waters of the Santa Barbara Channel were relatively calm as she stood behind the big metal wheel, relishing the feel of the wind and the taste of salt water, and the sheer joy of sailing a craft that was made for open waters and an unhurried pace. After an overnight stay, they had sailed from the marina at Santa Barbara at mid-morning, the third day of a wonderful sailing vacation. Lily wasn't alone in the cockpit. 6-year-old Emma sat on the cushions next to her, using her bushnells to track the pelicans as they swooped across the glistening late summer waters. She was pleased that Emma had taken to sailing, as she had, at an early age. Like her mother, Emma loved the feel of the wind and the quiet of the open water and watching the creatures that populated the waters of coastal California. To her right, Ryan was napping, stretched out on his back on the seats in the small cockpit. She loved him fiercely, and just watching him sleep filled her with contentment. The 2 years they had been together had been the happiest of her life, and for the past year she had been Mrs. Ryan Turner. She and Ryan and Emma had looked forward to this week away for months, ever since her friend Clara had first broached the topic of a sailing vacation. It was to be a time, without cell phones or schedules, and the first vacation in more than a year for both of them. Their last vacation had been their honeymoon. That was a magical time when they had hidden away in an 18th-century villa in Tuscany for 2 weeks, venturing out just a few times in their little rental Fiat to discover the markets and tiny restaurants in the hilltop towns that dotted the area. The rest of the time they were just together. Waking with Ryan's arms around her had filled her with wonder at the love they shared. As they strolled the Italian countryside hand in hand, she came to know the rest of Ryan Turner and love him all the more. Now they were on the Lady Nora, a beautiful 43-foot north wind which belonged to her friend Clara Wallace, who was one of the attorneys at the medical center. It had a center cockpit and sailed like a dream. The high cockpit design made the visibility exceptional, and it could easily be sailed solo. She knew that Clara had done so a number of times, but Lily preferred company, especially if that company was Ryan and Emma. Lily remembered the first time she had seen Nora. This was before she met Ryan. She and Clara had been associates at the medical center and had worked together on a number of legal issues that involved the trauma center. Over the months, that professional relationship evolved into friendship, and even though Clara was maybe 15 years older, they found they had much in common. Lily guessed that Clara was mid to late 40s, although she still looked to be in her 30s. She had a youthful attitude, a terrific sense of humor, and a body most women her age would kill for. Perhaps women of any age, she thought, smiling. Clara was a mother of 2 daughters, and Lily found herself asking her friend for advice when it came to questions about raising her own daughter. Clara's daughters were in college and seemed to be doing well. As their friendship developed, Clara discovered that Lily loved the ocean and sailing. So one day, she invited her to join her on the Lady Nora. Lily didn't know what to expect, but when they reached the slip at the Newport Beach Marina, she gasped as she looked at the sleek, white-hulled beauty. "My God, Clara, she's beautiful. I had no idea. When you said we'd go sailing, well, I thought maybe something a bit smaller." Clara had laughed. "She's not that big. Just 43 feet of the most comfortable and smooth sailing you'll find. 2 large sleeping cabins, fore and aft, real plumbing, and a complete galley, plus all the latest electronic gear in the world." Lily smiled at her as they boarded. Nora was bigger than anything she had sailed on. Her parents never owned a boat, but that didn't deter her from spending much of her spare time mastering a small craft propelled by nothing but the wind. In her teens, she had started working at odd jobs around the marinas just to earn enough to rent the small sailboats that were ubiquitous to the harbors and marinas along the coast of California, especially near San Diego where she grew up. She learned the skills needed to keep a sailboat moving, and most importantly, upright. In high school and college, she was usually found herself helping to crew something in the 30-foot range along coastal Southern California and Mexico. As they cast off and made their way past the breakwater, Lily wondered how Clara had come to have this magnificent craft. But how? How did I come to own Lady Nora? Lily nodded. Even from behind Clara's large green-tinted aviators, Lily could see the sorrow as she replied, "A parting gift from my ex-husband." Oh. Clara hadn't elaborated, and Lily hadn't asked anything more. They spent the day cruising within sight of the coast, and Lily spent a lot of time behind the big metal wheel getting familiarized with how Nora handled and falling in love with her. She discovered Lady Nora to be very well-mannered and easy to sail. Lily vowed that someday she would have her very own Nora. Some months later, after Ryan was introduced to Clara and Nora, and Lily told him of her goal to own a similar vessel someday, he reminded her, with good humor, that the only thing better than owning a boat was having a good friend with a boat. She responded in kind by reminding him that the same could be said for owning a pickup, but Ryan still owned a pickup. Laughingly, he acknowledged her point. Now Lily was at the helm, feeling as content as she had ever felt, unconsciously shifting her weight as the boat moved through the small swells. Her quiet contemplation on the wonders of sailing and her happiness with life in general was interrupted as Emma called out, "Daddy, Daddy, look, dolphins." Lily smiled. Emma was now standing on top of the large amidships cabin, holding onto one of the supports that held the fiberglass bimini sunshade that covered the cockpit. She was wearing a yellow one-piece bathing suit, her fluorescent orange life vest, and a pink baseball cap. Emma's blonde hair flowed out the back of the cap, held in a ponytail by a scrunchie. She pointed excitedly at a large pod of dolphins just off the port bow which had overtaken them. Lily remembered reading that there were more than 50,000 dolphins that called the Santa Barbara Channel home, a testament to the abundance of bait fish in these waters and the health of the channel ecosystem. She studied the sleek creatures as they surrounded the boat, putting on a show just for the sheer enjoyment of it. She was amused and pleased that Emma had called out to Ryan and not her. She loved it when she heard her call him Daddy, and he was her father legally now since the adoption was finalized about 6 months ago. Emma had been 2 when Greg, her biological father, had been killed. Like Lily, he was a surgeon, but he had felt compelled to change the world and spent his summers providing medical help to people in the more wretched parts of the world. He died in a helicopter crash in a sandstorm in Somalia. She thought she had loved Greg. They had lots of mutual interests, met in medical school, and took their surgical residency together. She looked back on it now, and her marriage to Greg seemed more of a marriage of convenience. Not that they didn't love each other, or at least what she thought of as love at the time, but it really was 2 people with a lot in common who were of marriageable age thinking they ought to get married. When Greg died, she had searched her feelings. She missed him and often thought of his wonderful sense of humor, tenderness, passion for the underdog, and boyish good looks, and she missed those. But where was the real sense of loss? At the time, she thought perhaps it had been swallowed up by the fact she had a 2-year-old to take care of, and she was still trying to complete her surgical residency, which had been delayed by her pregnancy. Maybe she just hadn't had time to dwell on it. Thank God her parents had been close by and willingly pitched in to help with Emma and everything else while Lily finished her training. They continued to help after she took the job at the trauma center. There was no way she could have kept up her schedule without their support as babysitters and grandparents, and most importantly, the moral support they provided. So when she met Ryan, the contrast had been shocking. What she felt for him transcended anything she ever felt for Greg. Her analytical surgeon's mind had been overloaded by such raw emotions that for the first time in her life, she felt out of control and vulnerable. It was disquieting, but there was no fighting it. She was Ryan's woman, and he was her man. Her tough-as-nails reputation at the trauma center also suffered, in a good way. As she watched the dolphins play around the Nora, she thought about the wonderful day at Camp Pendleton when she met Ryan Turner. She had never felt such attraction. By the time that luncheon was over, she was convinced he was the man for her. That first afternoon, she discovered Ryan was a man of deeds, not words, a wounded veteran and a hero. But she had not heard it from him, no, from a chance meeting with a Marine gunnery sergeant. And then a few nights later, shoulder to shoulder in the operating room, she watched his unflappable demeanor as he helped her save the life of an accident victim. Her parents seemed reluctant at first about Ryan. Of course, they were protective of their only child and granddaughter, and Lily had not dated much since Greg's death. And then suddenly along came Ryan, and he had swept her away. The day after he had first kissed her, she announced to them that she was in love and would marry him. They, of course, were concerned that he was 4 years younger than Lily, didn't have a 4-year degree, and was a fireman. But Ryan had won them over. He had made a friend of her father at their first meeting, a Sunday brunch hosted by her parents at their home. Lily's father had been an aerospace research scientist all his life, a graduate of Caltech, yes, a rocket scientist. But he and Ryan found lots in common, especially since he had served a hitch in the Marines. Although he was a supply officer and never got farther away than the training area at 29 Palms, out in the California desert, Lily's mother took her time warming up to Ryan, even after they were engaged. She could see the love they had for each other and how Emma adored him, but she was cautious. She had also loved Greg, and losing him had been a blow. The Christmas after they attended Max and Emily's wedding in Tahlequah, Max and Emily came to visit along with Ryan's parents. It was their first trip to California, and they joked that a Christmas without frigid weather seemed strange, but they might get used to palm trees and 65-degree weather. Lily's parents hosted a family barbecue in their big backyard on a cloudless, warm late December day. Seeing Ryan through the eyes of his parents and sister and his best friend Max, plus hearing the family stories, helped her see him as a loyal friend and caring brother and son. A man worthy of her daughter and granddaughter. Standing at the wheel in the shaded cockpit, Lily could feel his eyes on her. He was awake, most likely from Emma's call. She smiled more broadly as she thought about the reason for his siesta. She had worn him out last night. Well, actually, they had worn each other out, and that had been the way it was since the trip had begun 3 days ago. Emma had her own bunk in the main salon and was usually asleep by 8, leaving the evenings to the adults. She loved for him to look at her, seeing his gray eyes filled with love. Somehow the connection they shared meant they seemed to always be aware of each other. Lily turned to look at him. Yes, he was watching her, lying on his back with his hands behind his head, his eyes hidden under the bill of a faded blue baseball cap. He smiled and then sat up and waved at Emma. Seeing him awake, Emma smiled and waved back and returned to watching the parade of sleek gray dolphins that surrounded them, playing around the bow, diving under the keel, and making the white-hulled sailboat seem a cumbersome leviathan by comparison. Lily could tell what he was thinking and felt herself flush. He had that effect on her. Of course, she was wearing only the tiniest white bikini, covered with one of his white cotton button-down shirts. She had only the middle 3 buttons buttoned, and the sleeves rolled and the tails came almost to her knees. She had liberated the shirt from him even before they were married, after a powerful night of lovemaking. It smelled like him then, and she refused to part with it. Since then she had liberated a few more, but this was her favorite, even though it had now been relegated to a beach and sailing cover-up. Most nights when he was working, she'd take one of his worn shirts to bed so she could feel near him. Lily didn't know how long these feelings could last, but she thought forever was sufficient to describe the feelings they shared. Ryan got up and stood close behind her and put his strong arms around her waist. Lily leaned back into his embrace, feeling his warmth of his bare chest and smelling him. She was so happy she thought she's burst. Feeling okay? Wonderful. She shivered as he kissed her neck. Might have to retire this suit pretty soon, before I look fat. He laughed. That wonderful sound Ryan made when he was pleased. You fat? Never. You know what I mean, Buster. And it's your fault, she said with a false pout. She shuddered as he ran his hands up her thighs and up under her shirt where his fingers danced lightly on her body. My faulta? Seems to me you did a little more than lay back and think of England. She chuckled and leaned playfully against him. Well, maybe, but I'm going to gain weight, you'll see. Your mother showed me pictures of you when you were pregnant with Emma, and there didn't appear to be an ounce of fat on you. It just looked like you were hiding a basketball under your dress. He laughed. Will you still love me then, when I'm big and pregnant? She looked at him over her shoulder, now half serious. He rested his hands on her lower stomach where their child was growing. It was a gentle caress. More than ever. I love you, Ryan, and always will. He put his arms back around her waist, and she felt like she was the luckiest woman in the world. In this idyllic setting with its cloudless blue sky and the sea filled with playful dolphins, and a man who loved her unconditionally. She was his woman, his only woman, and he was her man. Okay, break it up, you two. From the lower cabin emerged a sleepy-eyed Clara Wallace, followed closely by Elliot Davies. It was obvious from their tousled general appearance they had not just been napping. Clara, like Lily, was wearing a very small bikini. Hers was yellow, and like Lily, loosely covered by a man's shirt. She looked wonderful, her body tanned and toned, belying her age. Elliot was shirtless and wearing a pair of khaki shorts. He was handsome with dark eyes and close-cropped sandy hair, almost as tall as Ryan, but with a heavier build. He wasn't fat, just bigger, with well-defined muscles and a broad chest. Lily had seen him shirtless before on Nora and at their beach volleyball games, but no matter how many times she'd seen it, she could help staring at the long fading scar that ran along his left upper arm to his shoulder. She went thinking how much pain he must have endured. Elliot joked about it, saying it was just the result of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Ryan told her it was from a rocket-propelled grenade a few years back on a combat mission in Iraq. Elliot was a widower with 2 daughters. The youngest would start college in San Diego in a matter of weeks. He was probably a couple years younger than Clara, but it was obvious he loved her very much. Lily, I leave you in command, and what do I find when I come up but the captain messing with the first mate? They all laughed. Want me to take over, Lily? She had a devilish look in her eyes. Lily giggled. Well, maybe in a bit. Ryan can't really move right now. She wriggled her against him as he continued to stand close behind her. Hey, 2 can play that game. He began kissing her neck. Okay, you two. Try to control yourselves. Lily retorted with good humor. Oh, look who's talking. The person who had to drag Elliot below an hour ago to take a nap? Disrespect of the captain constitutes mutiny. Mutiny, I say. Elliot, I think it's time to make them walk the plank. Elliot looked at Clara with a smile and said, Lily, maybe it's time you took that swabby deck ape of yours below. Deck ape? As soon as I can move without embarrassing myself, I'll show you who's a deck ape, jarhead. Lily and Clara smiled. They had heard similar exchanges before. The Navy and Marine Corps competition never ended, even though Ryan was much more Marine than Navy, and he had never even been aboard a Navy ship. All his assignments had been with Marine units. And of course he and Elliot had served together in Afghanistan. Enough, you two. She laughed as she said it, and then turned serious as she looked at Lily. Just let me know if you get tired, okay? Thanks, Clara. I will, maybe in about 15. Okay. Clara turned toward the bow and called out. Hi, Emma. How you doing? Aunt Clara, can you believe all these dolphins? Aren't they wonderful? They are, aren't they? They always look like they're having so much fun. Clara grinned as she made her to the bow where Emma had positioned herself. She was followed by Elliot. She paused as she stood on the roof of the main cabin and turned to Lily and Ryan. Do try to behave. Everyone laughed as she moved to the bow. Still standing close behind her, Ryan said quietly, That guy must have been an idiot. What guy? Her ex. I think so too. But things happen in a marriage sometimes. Lily didn't elaborate since she knew about Clara's infidelity, but had never confided that story to Ryan. Clara had confessed to her one evening after they'd been sailing. After they tied up, they'd sat in the cockpit and opened a bottle of wine and watched the sun set. Clara cried as she told Lily about how she had driven her husband Tom away, and how he and Nora had almost been lost in a horrible storm in the Gulf of Mexico, and how she thought for months he was dead. Then she sailed the newly restored Lady Nora to Belize to beg forgiveness. He had forgiven her, but her betrayal was not something he could overcome. She said she might have had a chance to win him back, but he had fallen in love with the doctor who had saved his life, and there was no going back. I guess so, Ryan replied, but look at her. She's beautiful, smart, funny, and full of life. Plus, she's a damn fine sailor. And looks sexy as hell in that suit. A well-deserved elbow in the ribs elicited an, ouch. What was that for? I'm just speaking the truth. Don't be noticing my friend like that. She laughed. As I was saying, the guy had to be an idiot to give up Clara for some sweet young senorita in South America. Ryan wasn't privy to the whole story. He just knew her ex had remarried and had a child by his new wife. He also knew Clara had sold about everything she owned in Florida, put Nora on a flatbed trailer, and followed her west for a new job at the medical center in San Diego. Actually, his new wife isn't just some young thing he met in the jungles of Central America. She's a surgeon, and a damn good one. I Googled her, and you can imagine my surprise when I discovered she worked at the trauma center before she went to Central America. That wasn't all that long ago, before me though. I did ask around quietly of some of the old hands, and turns out she was very well liked and they were sad to see her go. Well, that doesn't change my mind. He's still an idiot for letting Clara go, although he's come up in my estimation a couple of notches for ending up with a surgeon. Bet she's not as beautiful as you though. He laughed as he hugged her. Guess I won't show you her picture. Speaking of sad to see someone go, I thought we were at a funeral last week at your farewell. It's not like you're never going to see them again. You'll be just across the street, and for the next couple of months, you'll still be on call one weekend a month. She knew he could feel the slight tenseness in her body as she thought about her farewell. She'd missed the adrenaline rush of the trauma center, but she also knew she was nearing burnout and he was familiar with the signs. Even before the pregnancy, he had lovingly pointed out that she had to cut back. Lily had resisted, but an offer had come from one of the surgical practices near the medical center, and she had taken the job. The hours were civilized and the pay was certainly better, but she had made a deal with Ryan. He too would have to cut back. He had been accepted in the science program at the University of San Diego. Ryan had considered getting his Bachelor of Science, nursing, but she had convinced him that he would make a wonderful surgeon. He had protested that the egos of two surgeons wouldn't fit in their modest house, but after considering it, he decided she was right. So Ryan had to tell Elliot he was going to cut back. Basically, he'd do fill-in only when someone was sick or on vacation. Lily was glad Elliot was a friend and that he understood. Plus, she didn't need to remind Elliot that it was she who introduced him to Clara. The large diamond engagement ring she was now sporting was no surprise, since they had been a couple for several months now. Lily was happy for them both. Soon Clara made her way back to the cockpit, leaving Elliot and Emma sitting together on the top of the forward cabin. Ready to relinquish the helm? Yes, I'm feeling a bit tired. She turned to Ryan, who had resumed his place on the cushions to one side of the cockpit. I think it's time for our nap, don't you think? Past time, he said as he got to his feet. You'll keep an eye on Emma? You mean keep her occupied for a little while? She laughed. She and Elliot are talking about which hikes they plan to take tomorrow after our overnight at Santa Cruz, and whether they'll see an island fox, so be ready. Come on, Ryan, sounds like we better rest up before all that activity. Yes, I think we should. Lily winked at Clara as they disappeared below. Clara laughed. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.